Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jessica Knott. Jessica Knott was born on June 22, 1986, in Alamon Springs, Florida. She grew up in a happy family with an older brother, a younger sister, and loving parents. Her father traveled frequently for work in several states, so he was not always home. As a child, Jessica was active and cheerful. She enjoyed spending time outdoors with her friends and siblings and had a special love for animals. On April 5, 1996, when she was 9 years old, her family decided to visit her grandparents for Easter. That morning, her father left the house to do some shopping, while her mother stayed behind to clean up and prepare for the trip. After school, Jessica came home and asked her mother if she could go out to play in the apartment complex. The area was relatively safe because it was far from the main road and had many trees around. Her mother agreed but asked Jessica to play only in the yard. A few hours later, around 6 p.m., Jessica's father returned home and asked his wife where Jessica was. She was surprised because her daughter was supposed to be in the yard waiting for her father, but he insisted that she was not there. The parents went outside and searched the yard but did not find Jessica. Feeling worried, they decided to ask the neighbors in the hope that someone had seen their daughter. One neighbor said that he had seen Jessica in the front yard, sitting on the couch reading a book. But that did not help in finding Jessica. When darkness fell and their daughter was still missing, they decided to call the police. The police arrived a few minutes later and began searching and interviewing the neighbors. Despite their efforts, they could not find Jessica, so they expanded the search area to nearby streets. A few hours later, the police station received an unexpected call. The caller's voice was drowned out by loud noise, but the operator could still hear it. The caller revealed that the police would find the missing girl near a water pump station a few miles from her home. The police rushed to the pump station to check on the caller's instructions and witnessed a heartbreaking scene. Before them was the body of a girl lying near the station, hidden in a black trash bag. Just a few meters from the road, the pump station was under a bridge and could not be seen. The police quickly identified the victim as Jessica Knott and turned her body over to the medical examiner. Meanwhile, investigators focused on finding the person who made the 911 call and reported the news, as they believed the call came from the killer. But there was a challenge. The call was made from a public phone at a gas station less than a mile from the crime scene, and by the time the police arrived, the perpetrator was gone. Detectives tried to find fingerprints on the phone, but it was quite a challenge. A public phone could have many fingerprints. Furthermore, investigators realized that the criminal could have wiped the phone after making the call or used gloves. Experts concluded that Jessica was killed elsewhere and her body was moved to the water pump station. Marks on the ground in front of the pump station suggested that the killer could have dragged Jessica's body from a car and dragged it across the ground. Jessica's clothes were intact except for one shoe. Police could not find it in her pocket or in the surrounding area. The only clue found at the crime scene was tire marks on the ground. Police could not be sure that they belonged to the killer's car, but they took pictures of them. Medical experts performed an autopsy and determined that Jessica died from strangulation based on marks on her face and neck. It appeared that the killer did it with his bare hands. A hamburger was also found in her stomach, consumed less than an hour before her death. Her mother said she had not given Jessica anything of the sort that day, leading police to believe the food had been provided to her by the killer. Experts also found no signs of sexual assault, leaving the killer's motive unclear. Police initially suspected Jessica's parents because neither had a solid alibi for the time of her disappearance. Jessica's mother claimed that she was packing her belongings in the apartment, while her father went shopping. However, both had the opportunity to commit the crime, theoretically. Police were trying to figure out how the killer had taken Jessica out of the complex's courtyard without anyone noticing or without her calling for help. This led them to suspect that the killer may have known the victim and that she had left voluntarily. Another factor that supported this theory was the killer's tone during the 911 call. Although experts tried to erase the recording, they still noticed sadness and regret in the killer's voice, as if he truly regretted his actions. The killer's actions when calling 911 spoke volumes. It is possible that the killer did this for the thrill of toying with the police and manipulating the investigation, or that he truly regretted his actions and wanted to somehow alleviate that feeling. However, upon closer examination, investigators are inclined to the second option: that the killer truly regretted his actions. The police checked Jessica's father's car and found an important detail in the trunk. It was a roll of black garbage bags similar to the one in which the victim's body was found. However, after analysis, experts determined that this bag was not similar to the other bags in the father's car. Therefore, Jessica's father was eliminated as a suspect and investigators turned their attention to other people. Forensic experts studied the victim's clothes and body for clues. They found several important traces. There was a large amount of dog hair on the victim's body, which was very strange because Jessica's family did not own dogs. This suggested that the dog might belong to the killer. They also found human hair on the girl's body, which belonged to an unidentified white male. However, it took experts a few days to extract the man's DNA profile. Two types of strange fibers were also found on the victim's clothing. After analysis, experts concluded that one type of fiber could have come from the car seat cover and the other from the carpet. This further supported the theory that the victim had been killed elsewhere and taken to the water station by car. Experts attempted to identify the breed of the dog from the hairs on Jessica's clothing using an FBI database. This database contains microscopic photographs of hairs from many different dog breeds and has proven useful in criminal cases. The process of identifying the breed of the dog is done by comparing the hairs to samples from the database and eliminating each breed one by one. They eventually concluded that the hair on the victim's clothes came from a Shar-Pei. This suggested that the killer may have owned such a dog and that the hair had gotten on Jessica's clothes while she was in the killer's car or at their home. Investigators developed a preliminary theory that the killer may have lured Jessica into his car, taken her to McDonald's for a hamburger, then taken her home and killed her. Meanwhile, experts were also trying to improve the phone call recording. However, this was a challenging task. To solve this problem, detectives sought help from NASA. NASA has advanced tools for improving recordings, originally designed to improve recordings from space. They agreed to help and provided the police with a higher quality recording. Experts needed a voice sample from the suspect to compare with the call recording and determine a match. Because detectives suspected that the killer might know Jessica, they decided to play the recording of the call to her mother. Jessica's mother listened to the recording and said that the voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't remember who it belonged to. However, after listening to the recording a second time, Jessica's mother recognized the voice as that of a neighbor who lived in the same complex. She added information to detectives that the man often walked a Shar-Pei in the yard. Police quickly identified the man as James Crow, 35. During the initial investigation, investigators interviewed him along with other neighbors. He said that he saw Jessica in the yard while walking her dog. They talked for a while, and then he left. Detectives looked into his background and discovered that James had no criminal record. He lives with his wife, a nurse, and is currently unemployed, spending most of his time walking the streets with a Shar-Pei named Pumpkin. The detectives realized that James's voice and the fact that he owned a dog of the same breed were not enough to arrest him. So they obtained a search warrant for his car. During the search, they discovered two troubling clues. Under the front passenger seat, they found an empty Happy Meal bag, which was suspicious since Jessica had eaten a hamburger. Experts also noticed that his car had brand new tires, as if they had barely been used. The police discovered that James had replaced the tires on the day of Jessica's murder, even though his previous tires were not very old and could have lasted for several more years. James claimed to have left the old tires at a car repair shop, which was unusual since they were not old at all. The police went to the service center to investigate. When they arrived, only one of James's tires was left. They compared its tread pattern to those found near the body. However, the results showed that they did not match. Detectives were not 100% certain that the tire tracks on the ground were left by the killer's car, as it was possible that the tire tracks were from a maintenance vehicle that regularly visited the area. Police searched James's apartment and found a box containing rolls of trash bags that matched the bags found on the victim's body. Although not direct evidence, detectives decided to investigate whether there was any way to determine if the bags collected at the scene and at James's home came from the same manufacturer. However, identifying these bags was difficult because they had no distinct markings, and there were hundreds of similar manufacturers. To address this challenge, detectives contacted Roberts, who was in charge of quality control at a bag manufacturing company. Roberts was able to identify the factory that produced the bags found in James's apartment through the code on the cardboard box containing the rolls. This product was manufactured at a facility in Virginia. Experts discovered that small amounts of iron or titanium were present in the bag's composition depending on their color. Since the materials are constantly changing during the manufacturing process, the ratio of plastic to iron or titanium actually changes daily. Detectives decided to take bags from James's apartment and the crime scene to measure the ratio of elements in the plastic using high-intensity X-rays. This gave them a very accurate ratio. Careful analysis showed that the ratio of iron to titanium in both plastic bags was the same, which suggested that they were manufactured on the same day and even in the same batch. The process of manufacturing garbage bags often leaves a small amount of microscopic debris on the machine, which is normal. However, when the plastic sheets are cut into bags, this debris forms small streaks that can be seen with the naked eye. Each roll of bags will have a unique pattern made up of these streaks. The pattern on each bag was created by particles of debris moving down the conveyor belt, which were then replaced by new particles. As a result, the same pattern would be retained over several hundred feet of fabric. This suggests that the two bags were not only produced in the same batch but also within a few hours of each other. When comparing the bags from the suspect's apartment in the crime scene, experts found that the lines on them matched remarkably well. Furthermore, after production, the bags were rolled into a bundle by a machine, but the machine often did this unevenly. Without close observation, these deviations were barely noticeable, making the rolls appear smooth. When examining the edges of the bags, there were small folds and wrinkles that formed a unique pattern similar to streaks. Experts compared and found that the pattern on the bags from James's apartment matched exactly the pattern on the bags at the crime scene. This meant that with a high probability, the bag from the crime scene had been taken from James' apartment. In addition, forensic analysts compared fibers found on Jessica's clothing with those from the carpet in James' apartment and the seat cover of his car. The results showed that both samples matched. Furthermore, an audio expert compared the recording of the 911 call with James' voice sample and concluded that they matched. Although the experts had collected a significant amount of evidence, the detectives still faced the major problem that all the evidence collected was circumstantial. However, the police were confident of James's involvement in Jessica's murder and decided to arrest him. Since James continued to deny his guilt, the case went to trial. The prosecution presented their report on how the crime occurred. James spent a lot of time outside with his dog, and all the local kids knew him well. They often played with Pumpkin, James' dog, and therefore, they trusted him. Jessica was no exception, and this trust may have led to her becoming a victim. The police provided an explanation of what happened on the day Jessica went missing. At that time, James was walking his dog and saw her sitting alone on a bench. He approached her, started chatting, and then invited her to McDonald's to buy her a hamburger. Jessica knew James quite well, so she agreed. According to the police, on that day, James noticed Jessica sitting alone on a bench while he was walking his dog and started chatting with her. He offered to take her to McDonald's, promising to buy her a hamburger, and Jessica agreed because she knew him well. After eating at the restaurant, he may have taken her back to the apartment complex and invited her to his home. He may have asked her to play with Pumpkin. The presence of carpet fibers from his living room on Jessica's clothes suggests she was there on the day of her death. According to the investigation, James may have intended to attack Jessica, but something went wrong. Based on the autopsy results, the perpetrator not only strangled her with his bare hands but also pressed his palms against her face. This may be evidence that she tried to scream, causing the perpetrator to panic and attack. After Jessica's death, James placed her body in a garbage bag and put it in his car to transport it to a disposal site without arousing suspicion. James drove a few miles to a nearby water station, where he left Jessica's body. He then returned to his house, perhaps after stopping at a gas station to make a phone call. During the preliminary hearing, James' attorneys attempted to dismiss all available evidence, arguing that there was no solid evidence to prove their client's guilt. However, in capital cases, the standard of proof is much higher. In James's case, he had a very good chance of avoiding the death penalty. Based on these facts, a plea deal was proposed to James. Under the deal, James would admit to second-degree murder and receive a 40-year prison sentence without the possibility of parole, thereby avoiding the death penalty. In the summer of 1998, 2 years after the murder, James agreed to the deal. Although he was not required to disclose details of the crime, James mentioned that part of his decision was to spare Jessica's family the long ordeal of a trial. The prosecution believed James had shown remorse, as demonstrated by his 911 call. However, the purpose of this call remains unclear. The only plausible explanation is that James genuinely wanted to reduce his guilt for such a serious crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy with the deal because they wanted their daughter's killer to receive the death penalty. They were also disappointed that James refused to confess to the crime. What was even more disappointing was that James did not serve his entire prison sentence due to poor health. He died in November 2011 at the age of 49, taking the secret of Jessica's murder with him. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan, promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body, and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her stops from leaving her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence. Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home. To return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, and African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket, and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, and African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was matched, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these access were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio. But it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's lawyers argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, his eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vanessa Marcotte. On August 7, 2016, 27-year-old Vanessa Marcotte visited her mother, Rosanna, in Princeton, Massachusetts. Vanessa, an active person who enjoyed outdoor activities like walking, yoga, and running, decided to go for a run on that warm and sunny day. She was scheduled to take a bus to New York City later that day, where she worked and lived. However, Vanessa failed to return home after her run, which was unusual for her. Her concerned mother, Rosanna, sought help from the police. The case drew widespread national media attention due to its rarity in Princeton, which had not seen a similar incident in 30 years. Vanessa Marcotte was born on June 17, 1989, in Leominster, Massachusetts. She was an exceptional student and graduated with highest honors from Boston University in 2011, earning a bachelor's degree in communications. After college, she worked at WordStream, an online marketing software startup in Boston, before becoming an account manager at Google's New York City office. Every couple of months, Vanessa would visit her mother and aunt in Princeton, a small rural town with a population of around 4,000. As an only child, Vanessa's mother, Rosanna, cherished their time together and looked forward to her daughter's visits. On Sunday, August 7, 2016, Vanessa left her mother's house on Brook Station Road around 1 p.m. to go for a run before catching the commuter bus back to New York later that day. The area she planned to run in was familiar to her. However, when several hours passed and Vanessa failed to return, her mother grew concerned and contacted the police. Officers promptly launched a search, focusing on the route Vanessa was expected to have taken. At 8:20 p.m., a police dog tracked a scent to a densely vegetated area about 60 yards from the road and less than a mile from Rosanna Marcotte's home. There, the search team found the body of a woman, who was quickly identified as Vanessa Marcotte. A preliminary examination revealed that her death was a result of a crime. Vanessa's body was found without clothes, and it had burn marks on her legs, hands, and face. The location where the body was discovered was secluded, with no nearby houses, only the road and woods on either side. Vanessa's cell phone and headphones were missing, and despite a thorough search of the surrounding area, police were unable to find them. Investigators believed that the perpetrator had intentionally taken these items to avoid leaving behind DNA evidence. A sneaker with burn marks was found next to the body, and similar burn marks were discovered in other locations. Detectives concluded that the perpetrator had used gasoline in an attempt to destroy DNA evidence. A forensic investigation into Vanessa's death revealed that she was killed by strangulation. Her struggles against her attacker resulted in the presence of an unknown person's DNA under her fingernails. The fact that her clothes were removed suggests a brief but clear motive. The medical examination found evidence of contact with a male. DNA testing did not produce a match in either local or national databases. The violent crime sent shockwaves through the small town of Princeton, with a population of under 4,000 people. The incident was highly unusual for the area, prompting widespread concern. Local authorities urged residents of Princeton and surrounding areas to remain vigilant and report any suspicious activity to the Massachusetts State Hotline or the Princeton Police Department. In a press conference on August 11, Worcester District Attorney Joseph Early Jr. confirmed that the suspect is likely a male who sustained minor injuries, including cuts, bruises, and scratches, during the struggle with Vanessa. The news of Vanessa Marcotte's death sent shockwaves through her family, the Princeton community, and her co-workers. A Google spokesperson expressed the company's condolences, describing Marcotte as a beloved team member who worked in the New York office for a year and a half. She was known for her bright smile, dedication to volunteer work, and enthusiasm for Boston sports. Google is deeply saddened by her loss and is thinking of her family and friends. Boston University, Vanessa Marcotte's alma mater, also paid tribute to her. The university's executive director of media relations, Colin Riley, said, "We are heartbroken for her family and friends. They are in our thoughts and prayers." Initially, police investigated a possible connection between Vanessa Marcotte's death and the murder of another runner, Karina Vetrano, which occurred a few days earlier in New York City. On August 2, 2016, Vetrano went for a run in Spring Creek Park in Queens, despite her father's concerns about her running alone. She was last seen alive around 5 p.m., just before entering the park. When she failed to respond to calls and texts, her father alerted the police, who began searching for her around 11 p.m. Tragically, her father found her body face down about 15 feet from the trail. Karina Vetrano's murder shared similarities with Vanessa Marcotte's case, including the fact that her body was found exposed and she had been strangled. However, investigators initially did not believe the cases were connected. 6 months after Vetrano's murder, 20-year-old Chanel Lewis was arrested and later sentenced to life in prison without parole after his DNA was matched to evidence found on Vetrano's body. In contrast, the investigation into Vanessa Marcotte's murder remained ongoing. Detectives believed that Vanessa Marcotte killer likely lived in or frequently visited Princeton and was familiar with the area. They also thought that Vanessa Marcotte did not know her killer and that their encounter was accidental. To aid in the investigation, law enforcement set up separate 24-hour phone lines for the public to report any information. A key eyewitness came forward, reporting that they saw Vanessa stop at a local convenience store for a drink of water around 1 p.m. on August 7th. She was last seen walking and talking on her cell phone. The attack on Vanessa is believed to have occurred within 2 hours of her being seen outside the store. Her phone was last active at 2:11 p.m. and has remained off since. Despite an extensive search of the area where her body was found in the surrounding neighborhood, police initially found few leads. It wasn't until 3 months later that a new witness came forward with crucial information. The witness reported seeing a dark-colored Ford SUV parked near the crime scene on August 7th on 2 separate occasions. The first sighting was at 12:45 p.m., when the witness saw the driver, a Hispanic man between 25 and 35 years old, standing next to the vehicle and talking on the phone. The second sighting was at 2:05 p.m., when the witness drove by the same location and saw the SUV still parked, but with its hood down and no one in sight. This new information led authorities to launch a search for a Hispanic man who owns a black SUV and may live in the Princeton area. On February 23, 2017, 6 months after Vanessa's death, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early Jr. released new details about the investigation. DNA found on Vanessa's body had been analyzed, and a suspect profile was created based on the DNA and witness statements. The suspect was described as a Hispanic male, 20 to 30 years old, with an athletic build, medium height, and short or shaved hair. He was believed to have had access to a dark-colored SUV on the day of the crime and to have suffered visible upper body injuries shortly after the attack. About 3 weeks later, a police officer in Worcester County spotted a man who matched the suspect's description. The man was driving a vehicle identical to the one seen on the day of Vanessa's death. The officer quickly noted the license plate number and identified the car's owner. The police then visited the owner's residence, where they found 31-year-old Angelo Colon Ortiz. Colin Ortiz was a 30-year-old husband and father of 3 who had recently moved to Worcester, Massachusetts, from Puerto Rico. He worked as a delivery driver for a FedEx contractor and was familiar with the Princeton area, where he often made deliveries. Despite his clean record, Colin's behavior was concerning to those around him. Neighbors in Worcester described him as having a perverse nature and often making vulgar comments to people in the neighborhood. A former Princeton postal worker also reported that Colin frequently made crude comments about her and other women to his co-workers. When questioned by police about the attack on Vanessa Marcotte, Colin claimed he did not know her and couldn't remember if he was in Princeton on the day of the incident. However, he did agree to provide a DNA sample, signing documents to allow his DNA to be analyzed. The lab took some time to process the DNA test, which ultimately revealed a match between Colin Ortiz's DNA and the DNA found under Vanessa Marcotte's fingernails on April 15, 2017. As a result, Colin was arrested and charged with the crime just 3 days later. Prosecutors presented evidence that on the day of the murder, Colin purchased $5 worth of gasoline from a store located 6 miles from the crime scene at 2:35 p.m. This suggested that Colin had returned to the scene after Vanessa's death in an attempt to destroy evidence, including his DNA on her body. The district attorney argued that the DNA evidence was collected through proper procedures, which led to the charges against Colin. However, Colin's attorneys countered that their client's DNA sample was obtained irregularly, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the evidence. The defense team argued that Colin Ortiz's language barrier hindered his ability to understand that providing a DNA sample to the police was optional. In fact, Ortiz stated that he was unaware that he could refuse to provide one. Colin, a U.S. citizen born in Puerto Rico, does not speak, read, or understand English, as he declared in an affidavit. He recounted that on March 16, 2017, two white state police officers visited his home with a translator who spoke a Spanish dialect that was unfamiliar to him. The trial extended for several years, ultimately leading to Judge Janet Kenton Walker's decision on January 11, 2022, to deny the defense's motion to suppress the DNA evidence. Colin maintained his innocence to the original charge of first-degree murder, but through a plea agreement, he pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder, which carries a shorter sentence. Angelo Colin Ortiz, 36, pleaded guilty to the robbery charge and was sentenced to life in prison in October 2022. As part of the plea bargain, Colin will serve 20 years for the robbery charge, followed by a life sentence with a minimum of 25 years before being eligible for parole. This means he will spend at least 45 years in prison before he can be considered for parole. The Vanessa Marcotte family agreed to the plea bargain to avoid a lengthy and emotionally challenging trial. In a statement, they expressed relief that the trial ended in a way that ensures Colin will no longer be able to harm anyone. Vanessa Marcotte's father stated that he is pleased that the monster will be kept off the streets and that he will not live to see Colin's parole hearing. Colin's sentence brings closure to the Vanessa Marcotte family, who can now find some comfort in knowing that justice has been served and that Colin will be held accountable for his actions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Londano. Jennifer Londano, a 31-year-old engaged and responsible individual, failed to arrive at her job in Englewood, New Jersey, prompting concerns from her family and friends. As the manager of the newly opened Luna Lounge on Armory Street, Jennifer was a diligent worker with a spotless attendance record. However, on June 25, 2017, she vanished without a trace after closing the bar in the early morning hours. When she didn't show up for her shift that evening, her co-workers grew worried and attempted to contact her. But her phone was switched off, which was unusual because she always maintained regular communication with them. This lack of response heightening their anxiety, her loved ones decided to file a missing person report with the police, highlighting that she always checked in with them before going anywhere. As the investigation began, police visited Jennifer's apartment, where she lived alone. The officers found the front door locked with no signs of forced entry or damage. Upon entering the apartment, they initially noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The space was clean and well-maintained, with no signs of disarray or theft. At first glance, nothing suggested that the apartment was a crime scene. After investigating Jennifer's apartment and finding no leads, the police visited the bar where she worked as a manager to gather more information. They spoke with the staff at the establishment and discovered that Jennifer was well liked by everyone, with no reported conflicts with patrons or employees. Her co-workers described her as kind, helpful, and highly respected. Jennifer was a driven and ambitious person who had a strong work ethic. In 2016, she partnered with 40-year-old Rafael Lolos to open the Luna Lounge in Englewood, New Jersey. The bar was successful, thanks in part to Jennifer's exceptional people skills and management abilities. Lolos provided the financial backing, while Jennifer was the face of the business, charming customers with her warm personality. What the police discovered during their conversation with the bar staff was that Jennifer and Rafael's relationship went beyond business. They were romantically involved, and their relationship was public knowledge. Despite their close relationship, they had not yet taken the step of living together. The investigation revealed that on the morning Jennifer was last seen, she had closed the bar and gotten into Rafael's car, which was waiting for her after work. As the last person to see her, Rafael became a key person of interest, and the detectives decided to bring him in for questioning. Rafael claimed that he drove Jennifer home from work after she closed the bar, and they spent some time together at her apartment before he left to let her rest for her shift that evening. Following her disappearance, Raphael maintained contact with Jennifer's family and collaborated with them to try to determine her whereabouts. Since there was no apparent connection between Raphael and Jennifer's disappearance, the police concentrated on investigating other leads. However, they faced challenges due to Jennifer's phone being turned off on the day she disappeared, with the last signal coming from a cell tower near her home. Neighborhood interviews yielded no suspicious information. As part of the investigation, the police requested banking records, as they often provide crucial clues in such cases. When the bank shared the data, it revealed an unexpected development: Jennifer's bank card had been used even after she went missing. The investigation led detectives to suspect that Jennifer was intentionally hiding, but her family strongly disagreed, convinced that she would never willingly cause them distress. To gather more information, the police began to investigate the activity on her card, seeking to determine when, where, and how it was used. 2 days after Jennifer's disappearance, on June 27th, a pedestrian walking along Pier 44 in Brooklyn noticed something unusual in the water. The person stared at the object for a while, unable to identify it, before realizing with shock that it was a human body, or at least part of one. The police were summoned to the scene, and the pier was sealed off. A thorough search by divers yielded no additional body parts or evidence. The police faced a daunting challenge in identifying the victim, but a potential lead emerged. A tattoo was discovered on the victim's right thigh during a forensic examination. The tattoo, which may have belonged to the victim, was partially translated from Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language with complex grammar. The police released an image of the tattoo, hoping someone would recognize it and provide information. Investigations revealed that the tattoo's inscription was Sanskrit, but incorrectly written. The tattoo artist and the victim seemed to intend to write Liliana, but did so with grammatical errors, suggesting neither of them was familiar with the language. For days after the initial gruesome discovery, police received another disturbing call from a passerby who spotted a leg on the riverbank near 79th Street. Police immediately cordoned off the area and pulled the leg out of the water. The leg, which was intact from the knee down, seemed to match the remains found earlier, leading investigators to believe they belonged to the same person. A notable detail was the pink-painted fingernails on the leg. Despite an extensive search by divers in the area, no other remains or evidence were found. However, forensic analysis soon confirmed that the fragments found were indeed from the same body. Around this time, the police had already identified the victim. A few days after releasing an image of the distinctive tattoo, a woman contacted the police station and revealed that she knew the tattoo's owner. It was Jennifer's mother, Gladys Quintero, who recognized the tattoo on the news and recognized it as belonging to her daughter. The tattoo, it turned out, was a tribute to Jennifer's late aunt and symbolized the name Lily or Liliana. Jennifer's mother to New York to identify human remains. When it was confirmed that the remains were Jennifer's, the family was left shattered. The discovery marked a significant turn in the case, transforming a missing person investigation into a homicide probe. The family was not only grief-stricken by Jennifer's death, but also horrified by the brutal circumstances surrounding it. Unfortunately, due to the state of the remains, it was impossible to determine the exact cause of death. Despite an extensive search, the police were unable to recover additional body parts. As family and friends paid their respects to Jennifer at her workplace, the bar, detectives were making progress in their investigation. They tracked down leads on Jennifer's credit card usage. Through a thorough review of security footage and store visits, detectives identified the person who had used Jennifer's credit card, Raphael, Jennifer's boyfriend. They discovered that Raphael had left Jennifer's apartment on the day she disappeared to go shopping. His purchases, made with Jennifer's credit card, included a box of garbage bags and 2 meat cleavers from different stores. Later that evening, he crossed the George Washington Bridge into Manhattan, and his cell phone records placed him near the Hudson River. Raphael went home after leaving Jennifer's apartment and never returned. 2 days later, Jennifer's torso was discovered. The police suspected that Raphael might have killed her and dismembered her body using meat cleavers, a disturbing thought considering their romantic relationship. However, the evidence pointing to Raphael's guilt was mounting. As a result, the police obtained an arrest warrant and a search warrant for his home, anticipating that they would soon apprehend him. Raphael attempted to evade capture by renting a hotel room and paying in cash, but he was quickly tracked down and arrested. He did not resist arrest and denied any involvement in Jennifer's death, claiming that Jennifer had given him her credit card. Raphael continued to insist that Jennifer was fine when he left her, but detectives uncovered more evidence that contradicted his testimony. A search of his home revealed dark red stains in the bathroom, which were later confirmed by a lab test to be Jennifer's dried blood. Detectives investigating Jennifer's disappearance analyzed her communications with Raphael and found a pattern of frequent arguments, typically sparked by jealousy. A search of Raphael's home uncovered a box sent via post office and a bag that had previously contained a GPS tracking device. It became clear that Raphael had secretly installed the device on Jennifer's car, allowing him to monitor her movements. Cell phone data revealed that Raphael had picked Jennifer up from work and taken her to her apartment. Although Jennifer's phone was soon turned off, Raphael's phone remained active. Between 9 p.m. and midnight on the day of her disappearance, his phone sent a signal to a cell tower near the Hudson River. This suggests that Jennifer may have already been dead by then, and Raphael may have driven to the river to dispose of her body. Raphael and Jennifer's relationship was complex and tumultuous, with conflicts often centered on financial issues. Despite their efforts to establish a business together, opening a bar less than a year before her disappearance, their relationship was marked by animosity and blurred boundaries. Raphael's messages to Jennifer were volatile, veering between insults, threats, apologies, and declarations of love, with one notable instance where he referred to her as a gold digger. Jennifer's family was shocked and disbelieving when the man who had claimed to love her and helped search for her became the prime suspect in her murder. Raphael refused to explain himself, denied any wrongdoing, and hired a lawyer. Although police couldn't find the exact knives they knew Raphael had bought, they were able to purchase identical ones from the same store. Forensic analysis later confirmed that these knives were used to harm Jennifer's body. Raphael was subsequently charged with several crimes, including murder, desecration of remains, stalking, hindering apprehension, and credit card fraud. The trial, which began in November 2019, lasted for 2 months. Prosecutors claimed that Jennifer was killed by Raphael in her apartment during a jealous argument. Raphael's lawyers argued that the state had no concrete evidence to prove their claim, pointing out that there were no signs of a struggle in the apartment and no marks in the bathtub where Jennifer was allegedly dismembered. The prosecution countered that the lack of evidence was, in itself, evidence of a cover-up. The absence of any signs of a crime suggested that Raphael had made a deliberate effort to conceal his tracks. The bathtub, in particular, was found to be remarkably clean, with no DNA or physical evidence linking Jennifer to the scene. The prosecutor pointed out that an ordinary person's bathtub would not be as clean as the one in question. During the trial, Jennifer's mother emotionally addressed the judge, stating that the defendant had destroyed her life and her family. She emphasized that Jennifer was her beloved daughter, and the defendant's actions had left her devastated. After reviewing the case, the judge determined that Raphael was consumed by an obsession with Jennifer. When given the opportunity to speak, Raphael refused, only communicating with his lawyer. In December 2019, the jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Raphael guilty on all charges. The verdict was officially announced in February 2020. As a result, 43-year-old Raphael received the maximum sentence, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 63 years. This means he will be 106 years old before he can be considered for parole. Unfortunately, the remainder of Jennifer's body was never found. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella Rodriguez was born in Colombia in 1975 and moved to Florida with her family in the 1990s. They obtained U.S. residency and eventually citizenship in 2002, when Isabella was 27. She married William Hellman, but they divorced in 2015 after a decade together. Isabella then met Louis Bennett online, and they began a romantic relationship. In 2016, Isabella and Louis had a daughter named Amelia. 6 months later, they purchased an apartment in Delray Beach, a city on Florida's Atlantic coast. They married the following month, in February 2017. At the time, Isabella worked as a real estate agent, and Louis owned a small solar panel company. On April 30, 2017, Isabella flew to the Caribbean island of St. Martin to meet Louis, leaving their 9-month-old daughter with relatives. They planned to spend a week on the water, returning home to Florida on Louis's sailing catamaran. After stopping in the British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, they arrived in Cuba, where they stayed for a few days. On May 14, the catamaran set sail from Varadero, Cuba, bound for Florida. Isabella called her sister 3 hours later to say she would be home the next day. At around 1 a.m., Louis sent out a distress signal to the U.S. Coast Guard, reporting that his ship had collided with an unknown object and was sinking. He also reported that his wife, Isabella, was missing. A Coast Guard helicopter crew located Louis in a life raft around 4 a.m. and took him to Key West Island, the southernmost part of Florida. The catamaran was found floating upside down at dawn, but had not yet sunk. During an interview with investigators, Louis explained that he and Isabella took turns keeping watch. At the time of the accident, it was Isabella's turn, and Louis was asleep in his stateroom. He woke up to the sound of the collision and rushed on deck, but couldn't find Isabella. He called out her name, but she didn't respond. Louis suspected that the loose mast might have knocked her overboard. Louis also stated that the last time he saw Isabella, she was wearing a life jacket. When he was rescued, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer noticed that Louis's backpack was unusually heavy. Upon inspection, officers found 225 collectible coins in the backpack, but their origin was unclear. Isabella Hellman went missing on May 15, prompting a 4-day search and rescue operation by the Coast Guard. As no signs of her were found, the operation was officially ended on May 18. The authorities were suspicious when Louis Bennett, Isabella's husband, requested a letter from the Coast Guard stating that his wife was presumed dead just 24 hours after the search had ended. The Coast Guard denied the request, as it was outside their jurisdiction to issue such a certificate. 6 days later, Louis announced on TV that he was traveling to Cuba to rent a boat and continue the search for his wife on his own. However, just 3 days after making this statement, Louis claimed to have already returned from Cuba and met with Isabella's sister, saying he had checked hospitals but found no signs of her. Louis expressed his despair and resignation to the situation, stating he was struggling to accept that his wife might be gone. He described Isabella as his soul mate and someone he thought he would be with forever. The next day, Louis and the police attempted to retrieve his daughter from his wife's family, but they refused to relinquish her. Louis ultimately took custody of his daughter with the help of the police, despite the scandal surrounding him. During the dispute, Isabella's sister repeatedly accused Louis of being responsible for Isabella's death. Louis's calm behavior and actions after his wife's disappearance raised suspicions among both Isabella's family and the police. Investigations revealed that Isabella and Louis had frequent arguments after the birth of their child. Family, friends, and neighbors all confirmed this. Isabella had confided in loved ones that Lewis wanted to move to Australia, but she was opposed to leaving the United States. On May 30th, Lewis gave an interview in which he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. He claimed they had plans for a happy life together, but now he was alone and their daughter would grow up without a mother. While investigating Isabella's disappearance, the police also looked into the origin of valuable coins found among Lewis's belongings. It was discovered that Lewis had previously worked as a first mate on a yacht. The captain of that yacht had a collection of 617 rare coins worth around $100,000, which was discovered a year earlier. While the yacht was unoccupied and docked in the Caribbean, thieves broke in and stole the coins on board. Although the perpetrator was not caught at the time, the yacht's captain later identified the coins found on Lewis Bennett as part of the stolen loot, now that the FBI was investigating their origin. This new information led the FBI to obtain a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. Previously, 225 coins had been found among his belongings when he was rescued. On June 16, 2017, the search of his apartment uncovered an additional 162 gold coins hidden in a closet. Meanwhile, Lewis had relocated to England, where his parents lived, and had taken his daughter with him. However, due to financial difficulties, he returned to the United States and settled into an apartment valued at $125,000, while also receiving insurance payments for a lost catamaran. On August 28, 2017, Lewis Bennett was arrested in Florida and charged with stealing coins. He pleaded not guilty. A few days later, a federal judge set his bail at $250,000, which Lewis was unable to pay. As a result, he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Additionally, Lewis attempted to have his wife declared dead. Lewis benefited from his wife Isabella's disappearance by gaining control of their shared property and bank accounts. However, the judge refused to declare Isabella dead twice, as the investigation into her disappearance was ongoing. In a separate case, Lewis pleaded guilty to stealing coins and transporting them to the United States in November 2017. Lewis's parents asked the judge to be lenient when sentencing him, citing the fact that his daughter had already lost her mother. In February 2018, Lewis received a sentence of 7 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. On the same day, Lewis was charged with second-degree murder in Isabella's death. Authorities believed he intentionally caused the catamaran they were on to crash, which was allegedly a staged event to cover up the crime. The prosecutor's case was based on the claim that Lewis wanted to inherit Isabella's wealth to pay off his debts and take their young daughter to live in Australia. Isabella had expressed fear of her husband in text messages a few months before her death, stating that she felt he no longer respected her. She expressed fear about returning home. In a message sent months before her disappearance, Isabella wrote, "If you no longer like or love me, let's resolve this immediately. It's sad how you treated me the entire time." An inspection of the catamaran before it sank revealed that the portholes below the water line were left open. The damage to the dual hulls seemed to originate from within the vessel, near the water line. The water line is the point where the surface of the water meets the hull of a floating vessel. An expert hired by the FBI analyzed photos and videos taken by the U.S. Coast Guard of the catamaran before it sank. The expert concluded that Lewis's account of the events was not credible. The analysis suggested that the vessel did not sink due to accidental damage, but rather appeared to have been intentionally scuttled. A professor of nautical architecture and ocean engineering at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy testified in court that the Coast Guard found no evidence of a collision that could have caused the catamaran to sink. Divers inspecting the vessel were cautious due to the risk of collapse, and eventually, the catamaran sank to a depth of over 4,000 feet, preventing a detailed inspection. 2 years after Isabella Hellman's disappearance, a judge officially declared her dead. Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Scott Suskauer issued a series of orders stating that Isabella was presumed to have died on May 14, 2017. Despite the passage of time, Isabella's body has not been found, and she has not contacted her family. Based on the available evidence, it is presumed that Isabella is deceased. The statement said, in January 2019, U.S. District Judge Federico Moreno suspended Lewis's February sentencing hearing in Miami and rescheduled it for May 28, saying he would not act until Isabella's family could personally visit her daughter Amelia, who turned 3 in July. In November 2019, Lewis pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and the second-degree murder charge against him was dropped. Before the plea deal, he faced a possible life sentence for second-degree murder, but the new charges limited his maximum sentence to 8 years in prison. According to a document filed with the court, Lewis claimed he didn't remember what he was doing when he discovered his wife was missing. He didn't search for her on the catamaran or in the water, nor did he use flares to signal for help. Instead, Lewis packed his belongings onto a life raft and then intentionally damaged the catamaran to make it flood, allowing him to escape on the raft. Prosecutors stated that Lewis waited 45 minutes after realizing his wife was missing to call for help. Notably, the U.S. Attorney's Office pointed out that Lewis was an experienced sailor with training in emergency procedures, having previously sailed from St. Martin to Australia. Don't understand why he failed to use his knowledge to respond to the emergency situation. Prosecutor states that Lewis admitted to being negligent in handing over control of the catamaran to his inexperienced wife, Isabella, resulting in her falling overboard and drowning. Despite being an experienced sailor with a Royal Yachting Association certification, Lewis failed to ensure Isabella wore proper safety gear. In contrast, Isabella had no formal sailing training or experience, and Lewis knew it. Lewis received training in emergency procedures, including man-overboard protocols and night sailing safety, but Isabella did not. The prosecutor notes that only Lewis knows the full story of what happened on the catamaran that night. Following Lewis' guilty plea, Isabella's family, through their lawyer, expressed their immense pain and asked Lewis to show remorse. They stated that while Lewis can never undo the harm caused by taking Isabella away, he continues to cause additional pain by depriving them of contact with his and Isabella's daughter, Amelia. Isabella Hellman's family is grieving and missing her dearly. Although they have had limited contact with her daughter Amelia through 3 FaceTime calls, they have not been able to see or hug her in a long time. They long to be reunited with Amelia and provide her with love and care. As a part of their family, they want to be with her. They urged Lewis Bennett to do the right thing. Lewis Bennett, Isabella's husband, was sentenced to 8 years in prison on May 28, 2019, after pleading guilty to manslaughter in connection with her death. During his sentencing hearing, Bennett apologized sincerely to Isabella's family for putting them through immense pain. He acknowledged that his actions led to a devastating tragedy, for which he is truly remorseful. Lewis admitted to making poor decisions that worsened the situation. He expressed regret in federal court in Miami, where he waived his right to appeal as part of his plea bargain. Before the judge delivered the sentence, Lewis requested the opportunity to be released from prison early so that he could continue to care for their daughter, Amelia. Lewis expressed a desire to care for his daughter, saying, "I want to raise her in a way that honors my late wife's wishes." However, the judge ruled against him, sentencing him to 8 years in prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. As a result, Amelia will remain with her paternal grandparents in England for the time being. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alice Adams and Tibor Vass. Alice Adams and Tibor Vass were colleagues at the Radisson Blu Edwardian Heathrow Hotel. Living just 6 miles from the hotel, Alice had joined the team 3 weeks prior and quickly formed friendships with her co-workers, particularly Tibor. Born and raised in Budapest, Hungary, Tibor was a people person who loved music, playing almost every instrument, with the piano being his favorite. He had taught his younger sister, Isabella, to play piano, and they would often perform together for their parents. Tragedy struck in 2007 when Tibor's father passed away, leaving the family struggling to cope. Tibor, then a teenager, took on a more significant role in supporting his mother, Rosalia, and younger sister. At 15, he started working full-time to help alleviate his mother's burden. He later applied to the University of Budapest in 2008, hoping a college degree would lead to a better job and greater financial stability for his family. Despite his exceptional talent, Tibor was unfortunately denied admission to the university. Tibor discussed his plans to move to Great Britain with his mother, who seemed to support the idea. In July 2010, at the age of 19, Tibor relocated to the United Kingdom and settled in London. He began working at the Radisson Blu Edwardian Heathrow Hotel, where he enjoyed his job, responsibilities, and interactions with colleagues and new clients. Tibor quickly formed a bond with Alice, a talented musician, as they often found common topics to discuss. Both Tibor and Alice worked as receptionists at the hotel, along with Attila Ban, a 31-year-old who had been employed there the longest. Attila was recognized as the hotel's best employee in 2010. As Tibor and Attila were both from Hungary, they developed a close relationship. The hotel provided accommodation for its new employees, and Attila and Tibor lived in a company apartment behind the hotel. This arrangement was convenient, as it saved them money and reduced their commute time. Tibor was thrilled to be in England, but he didn't abandon his plans for higher education. He reapplied to the university in Budapest and was accepted this time around. Overjoyed, he had to return to Hungary in August 2011. To bid him farewell, a small party was organized on August 9, 2011, attended by Tibor, Attila, Alice, and other hotel employees. The next day, the trio was scheduled to work, but none of them showed up. Their colleagues raised the alarm when they failed to report for work at 7 a.m., and the police were notified at 7:53 a.m. Upon arriving at the house, the police found the door unlocked and the interior quiet. When an officer opened the door, he was met with a disturbing scene. Alice lay on the living room floor, her face covered by a pillow, with 22 stab wounds on her body, as later confirmed by the medical examiners. In the bedroom, Tibor's naked body was found on the bed, having died from 2 stab wounds to the heart. Attila, however, was nowhere to be found. The police surrounded the house to secure the area, and investigators and forensic experts started their investigation. As they examined the crime scene, they discovered that the bed where Tibor's body was found was not where he was actually killed. The bed was too tidy, indicating that Tibor had met his fate elsewhere. It appeared that the perpetrator had initially wounded him, removed his clothes, cleaned his body, and then placed him on the bed. Upon further inspection, the apartment was found to contain empty alcohol bottles and illicit substances, suggesting that they had been used during a party. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, the surrounding area, and the attic for Attila Ban, but he was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings, including his papers, were still in the apartment. As a result, Attila became the prime suspect in the investigation. While forensic experts continued to analyze the crime scene, investigators began questioning Attila's co-workers at the hotel. The staff reported that Attila had taken a particular interest in Tibor, a new employee from the same country, immediately showing him around and helping him settle in. Attila even went so far as to adjust his work schedule to match Tibor's. Tibor was a young and attractive man who attracted a lot of female attention. However, investigators discovered that Attila had romantic feelings for Tibor, which he openly expressed. According to the hotel staff, Tibor had rejected Attila's advances, making Attila unhappy. Things took a turn for the worse when Alice joined the hotel staff 3 weeks before her death, and Tibor started paying attention to her. Attila became jealous, despite knowing that Tibor was only interested in women. The investigation raised an important question: could Attila have committed the murder out of jealousy and unrequited love? A disturbing Facebook post from Attila, made before the police discovered the bodies, suggested that he was indeed involved. At 6:23 a.m., Attila had posted, "I would like to wake up from that nightmare." Friends commented on the post, expressing their concern, but Attila never responded. This message further solidified the investigators' suspicions that Attila Ban was responsible for the deaths of his colleagues. The number of stab wounds provided a clear indication of what had transpired. Alice sustained 22 stab wounds, while Tibor was stabbed only twice. Furthermore, the positioning of the victims was telling. Alice was found on the floor with a pillow over her face, while Tibor was discovered on the bed. When investigators spoke with the other people who had been at the apartment earlier that night, they learned that Attila, Tibor, and Alice had been the only ones left behind. This suggested that the tragic events had unfolded after the others had left, in the hours leading up to dawn. The news of Alice's death sent shockwaves through the families of both the victim and the perpetrator. The Adams family, Alice's family, released a statement in which her mother, Sarah, paid a heartfelt tribute to her daughter. She expressed her overwhelming grief, saying, "My heart is shattered into a million pieces. I will carry this sadness with me for the rest of my life. I deeply miss my beloved Alice and would do anything to have one more chance to hug her tightly and see her bright smile. The loss of my child has awakened intense emotions within our family, sorrow, anger, and a sense of devastation that we can hardly bear. As a mother, I feel that I failed to protect my child, and that realization is something I must confront every day. Not knowing exactly what happened to Alice on the night of her murder is a constant torment. I would rather face the harsh truth than be left to imagine the sequence of events that led to her death. Alice was an extraordinary and unique individual who brought so much love, joy, passion, and kindness into the lives of everyone she touched. Her loss is a tragedy that cannot be put into words." Meanwhile, police were searching for Attila Ban, but he seemed to have disappeared without a trace. When they attempted to track his phone, they found that it was transmitting signals from the same area as the hotel, which was unusual. It was later revealed that Attila was actually much closer than anyone had suspected. After spending 2 days examining the crime scene, the investigative team left the house, only to have the forensic team return later to conduct additional tests. Upon re-entering the house, they found that the door they had left unlocked was now locked from the inside. Inside the room, they discovered Attila Ban lying on the bed, intoxicated and wounded after attempting to harm himself with scissors and a knife. The investigators questioned Attila, but he responded bizarrely, using gestures to convey his thoughts. He was then taken to the hospital for medical attention. Unbeknownst to the investigators, Attila had created a hiding space within the sofa bed where Tibor Vasa's body was found. To create this makeshift hiding spot, he had made a slit in the bed's base, grabbed a phone, several bottles of water, and climbed inside. Throughout the investigation, Attila had been secretly watching and listening to the police through the holes he had made. Attila Ban was arrested at the hospital as the main suspect in the crime. His trial began on July 9, 2012, and during the proceedings, details of the heinous crime were revealed. The party had escalated out of control after Tibor, Alice, and Attila were left alone in the apartment. Prosecutors confirmed that there was a consensual physical encounter between the three, with DNA evidence found on Miss Adams' body. The evening took a devastating turn. Attila claimed to have no memory of the events that followed, only recalling waking up the next morning to find Alice and Tibor lifeless. Overcome with guilt and remorse, he considered taking his own life but was too afraid to do so alone. The court learned that Attila had been consumed by jealousy towards Tibor, particularly after a team-building event where he had thrown a tantrum because Tibor was in a photograph and he was not. The situation worsened when Attila discovered that Tibor had been accepted into a university program in Hungary and would be leaving the UK soon. The final trigger was likely witnessing Tibor and Alice kissing, which sent Attila into a fit of rage, ultimately leading him to take the lives of his two friends. Prosecutor Richard Whittam revealed in court that Attila Ban was discovered naked on a single bed, with injuries to his wrists, forearm, and neck. It was later found that he had been hiding in the base of a double bed. Remarkably, he had managed to conceal himself and remain undetected throughout the entire investigation, including the pathologist's examination, the removal of the bodies, and the crime scene examiner's investigation. When questioned about the oversight, Detective Inspector John Finch defended the police, stating that it would be impractical and potentially damaging to lift up every bed in search of people. He explained that this could result in the loss of crucial forensic evidence and was not a standard procedure in such cases. Rosalia, the mother of Tibor Vass, paid a heartfelt tribute to her son, remembering him as a friendly, outgoing, and talented young man. She recalled his childhood interests in music, arts, and sports, as well as his passion for photography, which led him to invest in a professional camera with his first paycheck. According to Rosalia, Tibor had many friends in both Hungary and the UK who appreciated his kind and supportive nature. She said that, on August 11th, I received devastating news. My 20-year-old son, Tibor, and his friend Alice had been murdered. The killer was a shocking revelation, Tibor's own friend, who I had trusted to look out for my son. This friend had personally promised to keep Tibor safe, which made the news even more difficult to accept. Days before the murder, I had taken comfort in knowing that Tibor had found a mature and intelligent friend in London. Now, I was consumed by grief and struggled to comprehend the tragedy. The subsequent police investigation and trial only added to my suffering, forcing me to relive the horrors of that fateful night. The pain and loss my family experiences will stay with us for the rest of our lives. The perpetrator, Attila Ban, pleaded guilty but claimed he couldn't recall the details of the crime. On July 18, 2012, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after just 5 hours of deliberation. A month later, on August 17, Attila Ban was sentenced to 2 life terms. He will have to serve 26 years before being eligible for parole. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Jessica Patel. Jessica Patel was born on September 16, 1983, in Leeds, West Yorkshire, England, where she grew up in a traditional Hindu community. As the eldest child, she developed a diligent and obedient nature from a young age. Jessica excelled academically, helped with household chores, and maintained a bright and cheerful personality. Jessica had a large social circle, but she was particularly close to a boy 3 years her senior, who was more reserved and shy. They often spent time together, and as Jessica matured, she blossomed into a beautiful young woman. Like many of her peers, she longed to find true love and build a happy family, much like the characters in her favorite movies. However, her romantic aspirations did not detract from her intelligence and determination. To achieve her goals, Jessica pursued higher education. In 2002, she enrolled at De Montfort University in Leicester, and 4 years later, she began studying pharmacy at the University of Manchester. There, she reconnected with Mitesh, an acquaintance who coincidentally attended the same faculty. They initially had no romantic feelings for each other, but over time, it turned into true love. This relationship has helped Mitesh grow and become more confident in himself. He is also accumulating knowledge and becoming more mature. Mitesh was extremely kind and caring towards Jessica, showering her with compliments and gifts. However, their happiness was short-lived. Jessica's mother passed away due to an incurable illness, leaving her devastated. Mitesh stood by Jessica's side, providing emotional support and comfort during this difficult time. As a result, their bond grew stronger. Jessica confided in her sister that she had finally found a trustworthy partner. Mitesh seemed perfect in every way, and she envisioned a happy marriage. In 2008, Mitesh asked Jessica's father for permission to marry her, following traditional Hindu customs. Although her father had reservations about Mitesh and felt that they were too young to get married, Jessica convinced him otherwise. They eventually got married in July 2009. The wedding was held in the beautiful garden of the bride's home. Initially, the newlyweds, Mitesh and Jessica, seemed like a perfect couple. However, things took a turn for the worse soon after. Mitesh's behavior changed dramatically. He became distant and cold, leaving Jessica feeling lonely. Their intimate life also suffered, and they didn't have any physical relationship for about 10 months after their wedding. This was very distressing for Jessica, who couldn't understand why Mitesh's feelings towards her had changed so drastically. Jessica tried to find fault in herself, wondering if she was the reason for Mitesh's change in. Meanwhile, she had just graduated from university in 2010 and was looking forward to starting her career as a pharmacist. She has a good education and a promising career. However, Mitesh's attitude continued to deteriorate. He became increasingly controlling and suspicious, constantly monitoring Jessica's every move. In February, her family suffered another grief. Her grandfather falls ill, his health begins to decline rapidly, and death seems inevitable. Manal's husband does not allow Jessica to spend much time with her family. This was the root of the conflict between they. When Manal confronted her husband about this, he became angry and responded by punching her in the face. As a result, when her grandfather was seriously ill, Jessica was only able to visit him a few times. Jessica comes from a traditional Indian family where his word is the law, restricting her from making her own choices. She felt trapped in a lonely marriage. One day, she confided in her family about her concerns. She expressed her suspicion that her husband, Mitesh, was being unfaithful. She noticed that whenever he received a phone call, he would excuse himself to another room. Additionally, he often stayed up late, spending hours alone, which further fueled her doubts. In 2012, Jessica's suspicions about her husband's infidelity were confirmed when she discovered romantic messages on his phone. Seeking help, she confided in Mitesh's cousin, with whom she had a good relationship. Instead of offering help or advice, the cousin blamed Jessica for her husband's behavior, implying that she was responsible for his infidelity. This response from Mitesh's cousin left Jessica feeling isolated and unsupported. To make matters worse, Mitesh also prohibited her from seeking comfort from her own sisters. It became clear that Mitesh was hiding something and trying to maintain his reputation and authority within the family and local community. In 2014, Mitesh and Jessica relocated to Lynor, a suburb of Middlesbrough in North Yorkshire, in an effort to start anew and distance themselves from their family. They purchased a large house, made renovations, and later opened their own pharmacy. Jessica had hoped that this fresh start would bring positive changes to their relationship. While their relationship did improve slightly, one thing was still missing: children. For 6 years, Jessica struggled with infertility, and Mitesh made veiled threats that he would leave her if she didn't become pregnant. In October 2015, she decided to go through in vitro fertilization. However, the initial attempts were unsuccessful, causing her to become increasingly anxious and depressed, especially with the added stress of hormone treatments. To make matters worse, Mitesh's behavior changed. He became distant and cold towards her at home. He would only show affection in public, and even then, it seemed superficial. He was often preoccupied with his phone, and the tension between them became unbearable. She reached her breaking point and suggested they separate, confessing that she was unhappy in the marriage. Mitesh's response caught her off guard. He claimed to love her and promised that things would improve over time. He even suggested that having a baby would strengthen their family bond. Jessica believed his words. For a moment she felt comforted and listened to, and her doubts subsided. On May 9, 2018, Mitesh and Jessica Patel received the exciting news that 3 of their embryos had been successfully fertilized, with a transfer scheduled for the following month. Jessica was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a mother and eagerly shared the news with her family. Tragically, their happiness was short-lived. A few days later, on the evening of May 14, 2018, Mitesh Patel made a frantic call to the emergency services, reporting that he had found his wife's body at their home. He claimed that he had left the house earlier to buy food and pick up his laptop from work. When he returned home, he found that the house had been burglarized and Jessica was lying unconscious on the living room floor. Mitesh told police that Jessica's skin was cold to the touch and there were bruises on her neck. He was clearly distressed, crying as he spoke. The police assured him that rescuers were on the way. When the officers arrived, they found Jessica's body on the living room floor, her wrists and ankles bound with duct tape. A grocery bag was nearby. Despite the medical team's efforts, Jessica died on the scene. The investigators sought to determine the motive behind the heinous crime. Upon examination, they found that the house had been thoroughly ransacked, with drawers and closets turned upside down. It was evident that the perpetrators had been searching for valuables, as they had even torn apart their bed mattress. The missing jewelry and cash further supported the notion that the primary motive was robbery. Jessica's husband, Mitesh, also believed that their house had been targeted by robbers. According to Mitesh's statement, on the day of the incident, he followed his usual routine, working a morning shift, going to the gym, and returning home afterward. His wife came home around 7 p.m. Later, Mitesh decided to order pizza and left the house at 7:44 p.m. Surveillance footage from a nearby pizzeria corroborated his alibi. Before leaving the pizzeria, he tried to call his wife to tell her he was on his way home, but no one picked up. Mitesh stopped at a pharmacy without notice, so he returned home later than expected. When Mitesh returned home at 8:50 p.m., he was met with a gruesome scene. His wife was bound, and their belongings were scattered everywhere. Neighbors was left reeling after the tragic event. This neighborhood is known as a wealthy and peaceful place, and has never had a crime before. The autopsy report revealed that Jessica's cause of death was strangulation, with the attacker using a bag, bare hands, and an electrical cord to ensure her demise. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators initially suspected that Jessica knew her attacker and had let them into the house. Jessica's family quickly arrived and comforted Mitesh, who appeared to be extremely sad and lost over the passing of his wife. However, the police had their suspicions, and a thorough search of the house uncovered some crucial clues that would eventually lead to the capture and trial of the perpetrator. A health monitoring app on Jessica's phone also played an important role in finding the truth. 3 days after Jessica's murder, the lead investigator contacted her father, who was still near the crime scene, and asked him and other relatives to return home so as not to interfere with the ongoing investigation. The investigator promised to provide more information later. Meanwhile, detectives were preparing to arrest the prime suspect in the case, Mitesh Patel. Several key pieces of evidence had led them to this conclusion. During the search of the crime scene, police found a damaged hard drive from a surveillance camera installed in front of the front door. The device was discovered in a suitcase under the bed. Further investigation uncovered a hidden photograph in their nightstand that showed Mitesh embracing another man, named Amit. Additionally, footage from a camera across the street revealed that only Mitesh and Jessica entered and exited their home on the day of the murder, May 14th. The footage shows that Mitesh returned home at 3:30 p.m. Jessica arrived home from work at 7 p.m., and Mitesh left the house briefly to pick up pizza at 7:44 p.m., returning at 8:50 p.m. Since no one else was seen entering or leaving the house, the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Mitesh was the likely perpetrator. Mitesh was the prime suspect in the investigation, but the police lacked concrete evidence against him. As the detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking secret that Mitesh had carefully kept hidden. Jessica had suspected that her husband was being unfaithful, and her instincts were correct. However, it was not what she expected. Mitesh was hiding his true sexual orientation. His marriage to Jessica was just a cover, a way to hide his true feelings for other men. 2 years into their marriage, Mitesh met Amit, an Indian man who was openly gay. Despite their cultural differences, they men quickly fell in love and secretly met each other whenever Mitesh was away on business. Unbeknownst to Jessica, her husband was leading a double life, pretending to be the perfect spouse while carrying on an illicit affair. In 2016, Amit moved to Australia, but Amit and Mitesh continued their relationship. Mitesh had had a plan to become same-sex parents with Amit by using Jessica's embryos and finding a surrogate. Mitesh had informed Amit that Jessica was having in vitro fertilization, IVF, and had asked if they could be together after this plan, to which Amit had replied that it would depend on the results. Mitesh confided in Amit, stating that eventually there would be no more obstacles in their relationship. In a message, Mitesh chillingly wrote, "Jessica's days are numbered." It was later discovered that Mitesh was secretly taking fertility-affecting medication to avoid intimate relations with Jessica. The investigation revealed that Mitesh's internet search history was reconstructed. He had searched for "how to get rid of his wife," Hindu funeral, and procedure for obtaining insurance payments for the murder of a spouse. Notably, Jessica had a £2 million life insurance policy. After her death, Mitesh planned to claim the money and use it to buy a property in Australia. In the weeks leading up to Jessica's death, Mitesh had been actively searching for a new home, aiming to create a comfortable environment for his future family. Investigators analyzed their cell phones and found incriminating messages. They also discovered a fitness app that tracked the number of steps taken by Jessica's. The data showed that Jessica's phone had not moved since 8:04 p.m. However, 15 minutes later, the phone recorded 14 steps, suggesting that either Jessica had made her last movements or someone had moved the device. In contrast, Mitesh's phone data revealed high physical activity and an elevated heart rate in the period leading up to his wife's murder, which was unusual for him. Between 7:44 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., Jessica's husband, Mitesh, walked up and down the stairs multiple times, creating false evidence of a burglary by throwing objects around the house. Before calling 911, he went upstairs to conceal evidence, including a hard drive from a surveillance camera in the safe of the pharmacy he and his wife owned. During the police investigation, they found stolen jewelry, £25,000, and a couple of gold bars, which Mitesh claimed had been taken during the robbery. They also discovered a roll of duct tape similar to the one used to bind the victim's arms and legs. The torn end of the tape matched the piece taken as evidence from Jessica's body. To create an alibi, Mitesh had to go to his workplace the evening after the pizza party. Despite planning for years, he was remarkably careless and left a trail of evidence behind. Furthermore, DNA analysis found under Jessica's fingernails showed that it matched Mitesh's DNA. Mitesh had scratch marks on his neck, which he attributed to a fall. During the investigation and subsequent trial, Mitesh, the accused, denied any wrongdoing. He claimed that his interactions with Jessica were mere coincidence. The 3-week trial strung together the developments in the case. It was established that he attacked his wife as soon as she entered the house. She fought back and scratched the attacker but was eventually controlled. Initially, Mitesh had planned to kill his wife by administering the lethal dose of insulin. However, This method takes a long time to be effective, and there is a risk that the plan will be discovered. To ensure a quicker outcome, Mitesh suffocated his wife by putting a bag over her head. To make sure his wife was dead, he strangled her with his hands and then used a rope. The prosecution presented physical evidence, including empty ampules found in Mitesh Patel's laptop bag, which linked him to the crime. Mitesh brutally murdered his wife, Jessica, in their home, a place they had shared for years. The entire ordeal took only 20 minutes. He then brutally tied her up to create the appearance that she had been robbed. Following the murder, Mitesh went about his day as usual, even stopping at a pizza place and calling Jessica's phone. The news of her death left both families in shock and disbelief. Tragically, Jessica had been seeking help in the months leading up to her murder, but her cries for aid were ignored. Only her sister seemed worried, but they couldn't do much to help either. The jury deliberated for 2 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. On December 5, 2018, the court sentenced Mitesh Patel to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Mitesh showed no remorse for his actions, and it seemed that the only person he felt sorry for was himself. The family was still grappling with the loss of Jessica's death, remembering her in their daily prayers and cherishing the happy moments they had shared together. It is unlikely that they will ever forgive Mitesh for his heinous crime. According to Hindu beliefs, her soul must be reborn. Since she suffered a lot in life and was unhappy but remained a good person, in the next incarnation, she will be rewarded. At least that was a comfort to her loved ones. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Jake Wagner. Hannah Mae Roden, 13, and Edward Jake Wagner, 18, met at a dance and quickly became lovers. As a result, the Roden and Wagner families began to spend time together, sharing weekends and parties, and Hannah Mae and Jake's love continued to grow. When Hannah Mae turned 15 years old, she revealed that she was pregnant. Jake was delighted with the news and hoped his family would be too. The Wagner family placed great emphasis on tradition and family lineage, and they adored children, viewing them as a continuation of their traditions. In fact, they often passed the name down from generation to generation, as seen in Jake's family, with his father being George Wagner III and his brother George Wagner IV. On the other hand, the Roden family had a more practical approach to family life. Even though they were divorced, Christopher Roden Sr. and Dana Roden remained close and devoted to their 3 children, prioritizing their happiness above all else. Unlike the Wagner family, the Rodens lived modestly, with Christopher working odd jobs and Dana as a nurse's assistant. Despite economic limitations, the Roden family instilled strong traditional values in their children, including Christopher Jr., Hannah Mae, and Clarence, Frankie. The family was overjoyed when Hannah Mae gave birth to a daughter named Sophie, and they threw a big party. However, when Jake asked Hannah Mae to move in with him and his family, she refused. She became increasingly wary of Jake due to his increasingly controlling and aggressive behavior. Hannah Mae was initially attracted to Jake's caring and thoughtful nature, but over time, she realized that Jake was trying to limit her independence. Jake's aggression repeatedly caused Hannah Mae's feelings for him to cool. Her refusal to move in with Jake created tension with him. Jake believed that Hannah Mae was preventing Sophie from growing up in a safe and healthy environment. Despite Hannah Mae's denials, Jake became increasingly controlling. Hannah Mae finally ended the relationship in March 2015, tired of Jake's aggressive behavior. At that point, the Wagner family wanted sole custody of Sophie. Jake had to put in a lot of effort to convince Hannah Mae to sign over custody of the children to him and his brother. However, Hannah Mae refused. In a heated exchange, Jake angrily sent a text message saying that if necessary, he would use force to gain custody of Sophie. This revelation confirmed the Wagner family's willingness to use coercion and intimidation to achieve their goals. To protect herself and her daughter from this unscrupulous family, Hannah decided to distance herself and raise her child alone. She chose to work as a nursing assistant, continued her studies, and took care of Sophie herself. The situation escalated when Hannah became pregnant again. Although Hannah confirmed that the child was not Jake's, he still had doubts and tried to discover the truth. In December 2015, Jake logged into Hannah's social media accounts but found no evidence of an affair. A trial ensued, involving repeated interactions between the Wagner family and Hannah. In one text message, Hannah asserted that the Wagner family would have to get rid of her before they could gain custody of Sophie. Jake shared this letter with his family, angering them. His grandmother, Rita Newcomb, 65, retaliated by forging an important custody-related document. During the custody trial for Sophie, Christopher Roden and George Wagner, 3, had a heated argument. This incident caused a complete rift in the relationship between the two families. The Wagner family soon came up with a terrible idea. They believed that Hannah Roden was uncooperative and decided that the only solution was to eliminate her and the entire Roden family in order to gain custody of Sophie. By Christmas 2016, this twisted idea was the start of a terrible crime. While everyone focused on love and celebration during the holiday season, the Wagner family had other intentions. They held a family vote to decide whether to continue with their evil plan or not. After everyone agreed, they assigned each person roles and began preparing. The Wagner family spent 5 months researching the Roden family home, including surveillance cameras, daily habits, and work schedules of each Roden family member. Each member of the Wagner family was assigned a specific task. Angela Wagner purchased a communications blocking device and planned to secretly install it on the Roden family's phone to prevent anyone from being able to contact the police. George Wagner, 3, offered to build a homemade silencer and handle transportation the night of the crime, securing a truck and not attracting attention. Meanwhile, Sophie was safe at home with Angela because the court had awarded Hannah and Jake joint custody of Sophie. The Wagner family chose the time when it was their turn to care for Sophie in order to keep Sophie safe. It was clear that the Wagner family had meticulously planned every detail to carry out a perfect execution. At approximately 8 a.m. on April 22, 2016, George Wagner, 3, visited Christopher Roden under the pretense of offering Christopher a job opportunity that could improve his family's financial situation. However, the job offer was just an excuse to get into the house. A moment later, Christopher Roden Sr. opened the door. A while later, as usual, Bobby Jo Manley arrived at Christopher's house to take care of the Roden family's animals. While outside the house, she noticed someone was inside, which was unusual for that time of day. Every member of the Roden family usually went about their work and was not at home. However, when she entered the house, she found Christopher and his cousin Gary, 38, lying in a pool of blood. Horrified, Bobby grabbed the phone and called emergency services, reporting what she had seen and asking for assistance. Still shaking, Bobby went to other relatives' houses and knocked loudly on one of their doors. A 3-year-old boy, the son of Clarence, Frankie Roden, appeared, and Bobby asked him where his parents were. However, the boy did not respond but just pointed towards the bed. When she entered the house, she witnessed another horrifying scene. Clarence and his wife, Hannah Hazel, lay motionless. Lying between them was their 6-month-old baby, still alive but covered in the blood of Clarence and Hannah Hazel. After Bobby's 911 call, police quickly arrived on the scene. As the officers approached the Roden property, a neighbor intervened, sensing worried. He requested that the officers check 2 additional addresses of family members. His concern was justified, as police found bloodied bodies in the 3rd house. The victims were identified as Dana, 19-year-old Hannah Mae, and 16-year-old Christopher Jr. The attackers had spared Hannah's youngest child, a baby girl only a few days old. Later, another victim was discovered, 44-year-old Kenneth, the elder Roden's brother, who lived a 15-minute walk from the others. By 2 p.m., 8 victims had been identified: Christopher Sr., Dana, Clarence, Hannah Hazel, Christopher Jr., Hannah Mae, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were young children, a 3-year-old, a 6-month-old and a 4-day-old newborn, along with 2-year-old Sophie, who was at the Wagner home at the time of the incident. After examining the bodies, police concluded that all the victims had been killed in their sleep by gunshot wounds. Detectives later reconstructed the events of that day. Christopher Sr. was awake when the attackers burst into the house, as evidenced by a wound on his right arm. Christopher Sr. attempted to defend himself but was hit with 9 shots to the head, torso, and limbs. In addition, 5 bullets were removed from Dana Roden's neck and head. The rest of the family died from gunshot wounds to the head. Gary was shot 5 times, Christopher Jr. 4 times, Clarence and his wife Hannah Hazel 3 times each, and Hannah Mae twice. Kenneth was the only one shot once. In total, the assailant fired 32 shots, with some shots fired after the victims were already dead. Some bodies also showed signs of physical abuse. Since no one in the area heard anything, investigators believe the perpetrators used silencers, indicating a carefully planned and executed act. It was clear that the victims were targeted, and someone wanted revenge on the entire Roden family. During the search, police found 5 Remington shell casings of different types and an unused bullet from a different gun model. The scale of the case shows that this was a case with multiple murderers. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, claimed that the criminals must have known the family well, or the dogs would have been barking loudly. The question of who committed this act kept police officers busy. The Attorney General's office provided over $20,000 for the Roden family's funeral. Roden family were buried in several stages. On April 28, 2016, Gary was the first to be laid to rest in South Shore, Kentucky. Hannah Hazel's funeral followed on May 1 in the village of Atway, Coteau County, Ohio. The remaining members were buried on May 3 in West Portsmouth, in the same county. Many local residents attended to pay their respects to the family. The surviving children were placed in the care of relatives. The neighborhood was gripped by fear. Police advised relatives of the victims to take precautions and warned all residents of Pike to stay their homes at night. The brutal mass murder outraged residents across the state, who demanded that the investigation's findings be made public and the perpetrators be caught as soon as possible. As part of the investigation, the murdered family's 3 homes had been investigated, followed by several more vehicles the following day. Forensic experts had participated in the investigation and had meticulously examined the homes, but no DNA evidence of the suspects had been found in any of the homes. Cameras had been installed in the houses, but they had not provided any useful information because they had been disabled. It seemed the culprit had planned every detail carefully, leaving no clues behind. However, detectives eventually discovered a key piece of evidence that had helped solve the case. An important detail was that marijuana plants were discovered at 3 crime scenes. At one location, around 200 plants were found. The police believed the cannabis was grown for sale rather than personal use. This led to speculation about the involvement of Mexican drug traffickers. However, the amount of cannabis found was too small to suggest an attack by an entire cartel. In January 2017, a close relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking. This was considered a coincidental circumstance. Leonard Manley stated that his daughter, Dana, had no involvement with the cannabis operations. Some family members confirmed that the older brothers, Christopher and Kenneth Roden, grew marijuana, but they were unaware of any large-scale cultivation. Specialized equipment for breeding chickens for fighting, as well as cages with roosters, were found at the Roden's house. However, it soon became clear that illegal cockfighting was not the cause of the homicides either. Months went by without uncovering the true motive behind the crime. On April 13, 2017, local authorities announced they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. Nevertheless, prosecutor Rob Yum stated the investigation was ongoing, suggesting they had some leads they were not yet ready to disclose. Another year had passed since the mass crime occurred, and its second memorial service went largely unnoticed. There was no coverage in the local press, and neither the sheriff or the prosecutor attended the memorial service. This led the community to believe that the investigation had stalled. However, on May 12, 2017, a special weapons and tactics team unexpectedly raided a home in Pike County, about 10 miles from the crime scene. Initially, they were searching for suspects, but it was later revealed that they were gathering evidence. Detectives also searched a house in Adams County that had once been owned by Jake Wagner, although he had sold it by then. The investigation took a dramatic turn on June 20, 2017, when the focus shifted to the Wagner family. The investigation included 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George III, 47-year-old George IV, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived approximately 15 miles from the victim. The Wagner family moved to Kenai, Alaska, claiming they were struggling to stay in the area. The Wagner family expressed their love for the Roden family, saying their deaths had devastated the Wagner family. The investigation indeed had a breakthrough. Authorities were seeking information from the public about the Wagner family's dealings in guns, ammunition, vehicles, and other related topics. According to the investigation, every family member was involved in the crime that occurred on November 13, 2018. The Attorney General announced that the Wagners and their sons had been arrested and charged with planning and carrying out the murder. Rita Newcomb, the 65-year-old mother of Angela, and Frida Wagner, the mother of George Wagner III, had also been arrested for perjury and obstruction of justice. In 2019, Rita Newcomb had undergone handwriting analysis to confirm her role in forging guardianship documents for Sophie. To avoid going to jail, she had entered a plea deal. As a result, the charges against Frederica Wagner were dropped in June 2019. 2 years later, on April 22, 2021, Jake had reached an agreement with the prosecution. In exchange for revealing details of the crime, all family members would receive life sentences instead of the death penalty. Jake had admitted to killing 5 of the 8 individuals and had received 23 criminal charges, including 8 felonies. The remaining charges had included theft, conspiracy, illegal possession of ammunition, forgery, interception of messages, unlawful use of property, obstruction of justice, corrupt activities, and unlawful intimate conduct with a young woman. Jake had explained that he saw eliminating Hannah May as the only way to ensure custody of his daughter. He believed that if he did not kill the entire Roden family, they would seek revenge and refuse to give custody of Sophie to him. Angela was next to face trial on September 10th. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy, aggravated robbery, and tampering with evidence. In exchange for her testimony against the other defendants, the murder charge was dropped. Angela received a sentence of 30 years in prison. The trial of George Wagner IV had begun on August 28, 2022. Although he denied any involvement in the crime, the prosecution presented evidence of his participation in the planning, execution, and cover-up. Ultimately, George IV was found guilty on 22 counts and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. George III's trial was scheduled for February 2024. Despite the convictions of his family members, he maintained his innocence. The once harmonious family's descent into madness was baffling, and their actions were unforgivable. The actions of the Wagner family left 3 children orphaned, depriving them of the love of their parents, relatives, and a peaceful life. One couldn't help but wonder what Sophie would be like when she grew up and realized what had happened. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kelly Cochran. Christopher Reagan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, where he spent his early years. At the age of 20, he decided to serve his country and joined the military. Christopher committed himself to protecting the peace and safety of his fellow citizens. Christopher was stationed at a military base near Marquette, where he met Terry O'Donnell, a young teacher from Iron River. They lived in the same area and would often see each other around town as they spent more time together. They remained close friends for many years, but Christopher eventually decided to leave the military and move to Traverse City. Despite the distance between them, they continued to communicate regularly, and in December 2012, Christopher asked Terry to take their relationship to the next level. Terry and Christopher have known each other for many years. They find they have a lot in common. They decide to live together. Terry and Christopher choose Iron River as the perfect place for them to settle down. Christopher finds a job at a factory that makes parts for military ships, where he becomes a supervisor. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began to arise in their relationship. Unfortunately, they didn't make an effort to work through their issues, and it became clear that their relationship was coming to an end. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to go their separate ways. Despite the breakup, they were able to part on good terms and remain friends. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher realized that he couldn't live in her house anymore, so he decided to rent his own house. He felt that the town he lived in was too small, and he wanted a more dynamic city. Christopher began applying for jobs in various locations, sending out his resume in search of a new job. In October 2014, Christopher found a job in Asheville, North Carolina. As Christopher settled into his new life in Asheville, he contacted Terry on October 14th, telling her that he would be taking the day off tomorrow and looking forward to meeting Terry for a walk. However, on October 15th, Christopher did not contact Terry as planned. Terry became worried and tried calling him for several days, but he did not answer. She even contacted their mutual friends. 10 days after Christopher went missing, Terry filed a police report. The police accepted the report and told Terry that Christopher had probably moved to a new job in North Carolina and that he had started a new life and wanted to contact old friends. To avoid speculation, investigators conducted a thorough investigation. They identified Christopher's new workplace and contacted an employee to gather information. However, surprisingly, they found out that Christopher had not shown up to work in 10 days. The police then suspected that he might have been involved in an accident, given his frequent solo outdoor trips. The search for Christopher led investigators to the local woods, where he was known to frequent. Trained search dogs were brought in to aid in the effort. But no signs of Christopher were found. Terry, concerned that Christopher may have been injured or in an accident, suggested searching his former apartment. The investigators agreed and visited the apartment, where they were met with a scene of disarray. Clothes and belongings were scattered across the floor, and closets were left open. Initially, they thought that Christopher might have simply been messy, but Terry disputed this, stating that Christopher was typically neat and organized. The detectives started to suspect a connection between the recent events and the crime. After investigating Christopher's home, they decided to expand their search. A thorough search of the neighborhood led them to find Christopher's car 8 miles outside Iron River, near the city limits. The police found it unusual that the car was left there, suggesting it might have been abandoned unintentionally. After forcing open a door, they searched the interior and found nothing suspicious, only ordinary clothing. However, one of the officers noticed a small yellow piece of paper on the front passenger seat with a detailed route written on it. They decided to follow the route to see where it led. Although the paper did not specify an exact address, the directions were clear. According to Terry, Christopher, although familiar with the city of Iron River, did not know the local street names, so he wrote down the directions using landmarks such as bus stops and gas stations. Terry deduced from the detailed notes that this was Christopher's first time visiting the location. The detectives followed the route outlined on the paper, which led them to a nearby town and a specific house mentioned in Christopher's notes. When they arrived, they knocked on the door to gather information in Christopher's connection to the location. A man named Jason Cochran answered the door, and his wife Kelly was there. The police explained that they were investigating Christopher's disappearance and had found a lead pointing to this address. Terry, who worked with Christopher at the same factory, revealed that they were co-workers. She had tried to contact Christopher via text message in mid-October but had not received a response. Investigators found a note in Christopher's car that showed the route to Jason's house. Although confused, Jason and Kelly agreed to cooperate with the investigation. After a short interrogation without any further clues, the detectives left Jason Cochran's house. Detectives then interviewed Christopher's co-workers at the factory. A supervisor shared that Christopher had been having an affair with Kelly Cochran, which was an open secret among employees. This revelation sparked interest, leading investigators to re-question the Jason and Kelly. During re-interrogation, Kelly confessed to her relationship with Christopher. However, she claimed that she could not reveal this information earlier because her husband Jason was present. According to Kelly, Jason agreed to her affair. However, Christopher's colleagues disputed Kelly's story. They claimed that Jason did not approve of Kelly's affair. When Jason was later brought in for questioning, he completely denied approving of Kelly's affair. His strong objection to Kelly's infidelity aroused suspicion and made him a suspect. The investigation into Christopher's disappearance was ongoing, but the lack of concrete evidence made it impossible to determine whether Kelly was involved. As a result, Kelly and Jason were released from the police station. The case remained unsolved for 5 months. In March 2015, a new investigator, Detective Jeremy Ogden from the Hobart Police Department, took over the case. Jeremy Ogden began by thoroughly examining the Jason Cochran family's background. Kelly and Jason had met in high school and started living together soon after graduation. They had distinct personalities. Kelly was outgoing, sociable, and talkative, while Jason was quiet and reserved. He rarely initiated conversations, only responding to questions asked of him. Despite their differences, they decided to get married. After the wedding, they started a business together, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it provided a decent income for they. Jason handled most of the pool maintenance work, but the constant stress and physical strain took a toll on his health. He began to experience back problems and felt increasingly heavier every day. Eventually, he realized he could no longer continue running the business. Kelly then took over the responsibilities of running the business, hoping that Jason would soon recover and return to his duties. However, his condition continued to worsen, and medical treatments were not providing the desired relief. Kelly searched for alternative ways to help her husband recover. During her search, Kelly discovered a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. However, the plant was banned in their home state, making it inaccessible to them. To access the treatment, Kelly and Jason decided to relocate to Michigan, specifically Iron River Township, in 2014. Jason consulted his doctor and received a prescription for pain medication. Around the same time, in early 2014, Jason's wife, Kelly Cochran, started working at a factory that manufactured parts for U.S. warships. Kelly and Jason moved to the area. Kelly and Jason worked at the same factory where Christopher Reagan worked. Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This friendship was especially important to Christopher. After gathering evidence, prosecutors presented their case to a Michigan judge to obtain a search warrant for Kelly and Jason's home. The judge granted the warrant, and on March 6, a team of investigators searched Kelly and Jason's home, carefully searching for any evidence related to Christopher's disappearance. The only significant discovery was a book written by Jason. He used a pseudonym in the world of video games. The title of the work was ordinary, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described the murder of the person who had harmed him. After reading the book, the detectives noticed a character who bore an uncanny resemblance to Christopher. This raised suspicions about Jason, leading them to wonder if he had been inspired by the real-life crimes he had committed. 3 weeks later, a second search of Jason's home was conducted. The police hoped to find crucial evidence that had been missed in the first search. However, when they arrived at the Jason's home, they found it empty, with no cars in sight. Repeated attempts to knock on the door went unanswered. It was later discovered that Kelly and Jason had fled the state shortly after the initial search, moving to Indiana. Their sudden departure left investigators concerned. Michigan police, needing a DNA sample, asked Indiana police for help. Indiana police went to Jason's new home, where they had just moved. The investigation into Christopher Reagan's disappearance ran out of clues. Time passed, and on February 22, 2016, Hobart, Indiana, police received a frantic call from Kelly Cochran, who tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, Kelly was in a panic. It was clear that Jason was beyond saving. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning like fire, as if he had overheated. The doctors officially confirmed Jason's death. His body was then sent for a thorough forensic examination. Meanwhile, Kelly was handed over to a police patrol and taken to relatives who lived nearby. To piece together what happened, investigators thoroughly searched the Jason's new home. During the search, a police officer found a syringe at the foot of Jason in his wife's bed. Initially, investigators believed Jason's death was due to substance abuse. The medical examiner's report showed that Jason had multiple drugs in his system, but Jason's death was due to strangulation, confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. The focus of the investigation then shifted to Kelly Cochran, who appeared to be connected to both crimes. She was now considered the prime suspect in not only Christopher's disappearance but also her husband's murder. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was summoned to the police station to answer questions about her husband's death. Under direct questioning and pressure from investigators, Kelly denied any involvement in her husband's death and Christopher's disappearance. She claimed that Jason's death was due to a drug overdose. Months later, investigators still lacked concrete evidence to convict Kelly. During the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden met Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's. Kelly informed Walter of Jason's death, who then contacted the police. Walter shared his insights with investigators, saying he did not believe Jason's death was caused by drugs. He claimed that Jason had used herbs to relieve his chronic back pain. In March of the previous year, Jason confided in Walter about his concerns. Jason and Kelly were asked to go to Indiana because the Iron River police suspected them of being involved in Christopher's disappearance. This had a significant impact on Jason, leading to depression. Walter observed a notable change in Jason's behavior, with Kelly increasingly taking control over his life. Jason appeared to be constantly anxious, and he began to avoid social gatherings as soon as Kelly returned from work. As the investigation progressed, this information became a vital link. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden devised a plan to pressure Kelly into revealing the truth about Jason's death. Walter, Jason's friend, was used as bait to lure Kelly into a trap. On March 12, 2016, Walter, under police surveillance and equipped with a listening device, called Kelly. He told her that Jason had given him a letter containing important information before his death, with the condition that it be sent to the police if anything happened to him. However, Kelly surprisingly asked Walter to drop the idea, which caught both Walter and the police off guard. Despite this development, the detectives still lacked direct evidence to build a case. In the weeks following her initial questioning, Kelly was subjected to multiple interrogations by investigators trying to uncover the truth. Despite their efforts, she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, on April 26, 2016, it became apparent that Kelly Cochran had evaded the scrutiny of investigators and was on the loose. Detectives joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart to launch a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran. Walter Hammerman, who had cooperated with the police, was shocked and frightened by the news. He feared that Kelly might never be caught and could potentially harm him again. As the search for Kelly intensified, her phone went off, leading investigators to believe she was deliberately concealing her location. Kelly evaded police and fled to Wingo, Kentucky, over 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective notified the local authorities to exercise extreme caution if they found Kelly. Police in Wingo identified Kelly at her cousin's house on April 28. Understanding that she posed a potential danger and was prone to attempting to escape, officers rapidly proceeded to the residence, avoiding advance warnings that afternoon and detaining Kelly on site. During the interview, Kelly revealed new details. That Kelly was deeply in love with Jason and wanted to leave the city life behind to start over with him. On October 13, 2015, Jason discovered Kelly's infidelity. Jason made a dark pact. The adulterer was obliged to kill his lover if the affair was exposed. Kelly claimed she had never taken this pact seriously, thinking it was just a joke. However, Jason was resolute and warned Kelly that if she didn't fulfill her end of the bargain, he would take matters into his own hands. Despite her reservations, Kelly reluctantly helped Jason commit a heinous crime. The next evening, October 14, 2015, Christopher arrived at Kelly's house, eager to spend a romantic evening with Christopher while her husband was away. Kelly had planned a fun evening, complete with dinner and intimacy. Kelly and Christopher had dinner together and then went upstairs to the house. Then Jason suddenly appeared. Jason rushed into the bedroom, holding a rifle. Christopher immediately realized that he was in danger. Without hesitation, Jason shot Christopher in the head, killing him. Jason and Kelly then dragged the body down to the basement, where they began to dismember it with a hacksaw. Jason and Kelly cut Christopher's limbs and head off his body and placed the remains in several garbage bags. They then dumped the bags in the woods near Crystal Falls. To avoid suspicion, they drove Christopher's car away from the house. Kelly and Jason thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence of the crime. Kelly was consumed by a deep-seated anger towards her husband, whom she blamed for ruining her chance at happiness with he she truly loved, Christopher. She couldn't forgive her husband for depriving her of the opportunity to be with him, and the pain and loss she felt lingered every day. Kelly's resentment towards her husband eventually turned to hatred, and she knew she could no longer live peacefully with him. An opportunity for revenge presented itself on February 22, 2016, when her husband complained of back pain. Kelly convinced him to let her give her an injection, but she deliberately gave him a dose that killed him. However, the medication didn't work as planned, and her husband was still breathing. Kelly then suffocated him by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. To ensure he was dead, she also squeezed his neck, which explained the bruises found on his body. After confessing to the crime, Kelly cooperated with the police to help them locate Christopher's remains. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden led a team to a remote area near Crystal Falls to search for Christopher's body. A canine unit picked up the scent and led the team to a small hill, where they found a human skull with bullet holes, indicating a homicide. The team believed they had discovered Christopher's remains. Further examination of the scene yielded additional evidence, including a .22 caliber bullet, a broken firearm. Dental records later confirmed the victim's identity. This breakthrough finally solved the case that had haunted investigators for 2 years. Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher and Jason Cochran in April 2016. On February 13, 2017, Kelly was brought to court in Michigan to face charges. The prosecutor argued that Kelly was the mastermind behind the crime and that she had planned and executed. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including Kelly's own confession, to support their case. However, Kelly told a different story. She claimed that her husband, Jason, was the one who had planned and committed the crime. According to Kelly, Jason was jealous and had been abusing her. On the day of the crime, Jason allegedly hid in the basement and surprised Kelly and Christopher, then shot Christopher in a fit of rage. Kelly also claimed that Jason had forced her to help him dismember the body by threatening to harm her. Despite Kelly's new version of events, the jury found her guilty of premeditated murder after deliberating for 3 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After being sentenced, Kelly Cochran was sent directly to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ionia, Michigan, where she is currently serving her sentence. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, one of 6 children in a large family. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise and chaos of the city. In the summer of 1975, 14-year-old Christy spent most of her days socializing with friends and family, often going to the local neighborhood swimming pool. In late August, Christy babysat for a family friend on the evening of August 22nd. The next day, August 23rd, she woke up around noon and decided to go swimming to cool off. She invited her sister Kim to join her and they went to the residential area. While Kim went swimming, Christy relaxed on a deck chair. A short time later, Kim went ashore and found Christy nowhere to be seen, but Kim decided not to look for her and instead stayed at the pool. Surprisingly, when Kim returned home, Christy was not there. Hours passed and Christy still hadn't come home. Kim became even more worried. She decided to look for Christy and ran into a neighbor who told her that the police had found the body of a young woman a few miles away, but they had not been able to identify it. Kim rushed home to tell her parents, who immediately called the police to report Christy missing. It was very likely that the body found belonged to Christy, so the police directed them to the morgue for identification. Although it was difficult to recognize the identity of the body due to the severely bruised face, Christy's mother eventually accepted that the body was Christy's, her beloved daughter, thanks to the birthmark on her leg. Police later explained to the family what had happened. It turned out that at about 2:30 p.m. that same day, a man reported finding a body in the woods behind the local shopping center. He, his wife, and son had gone there to buy toys, but before entering the store, their son wanted to take a walk on the trail behind the building. This path was a popular walking path leading to a river and the area was famous for its beauty. Together with his parents, the son went for a walk on this trail. During their hike, they came across a disturbing scene about 10 yards down the trail. A man was kneeling on top of someone and repeatedly beating him with a wooden object. When he saw the family, he immediately ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a seriously injured little girl covered in blood. His wife, who had medical training, checked the victim's pulse, but there was none. The father quickly went to a nearby shopping center and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided investigators with a detailed description of the suspect, who was a tall, slim young man with long black hair, wearing jean shorts and boots, about 20 years old. Police created a sketch of the suspect based on their description and distributed it to patrol officers. However, the investigation of the crime scene yielded no results. The wooden object used as the murder weapon was found, but they discovered no other evidence linking the perpetrator. Notably, the victim's hands were tied with a telephone cord and her bikini top was pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were found next to her body. Despite these signs, forensic experts found no evidence that a sexual assault had occurred. Luckily, detectives were able to continue their investigation thanks to new information from Kim, who told them about a conversation between Christy and a friend, Carol. The police summoned Carol. Carol recounted to police a suspicious phone call she had received from a stranger claiming to be a local DJ. The man had called her to talk about a fake cheerleading competition at the state fair, which was supposedly being held behind the local shopping mall. He announced the event would start at 1:45 p.m. and had told Carol to wait for someone at the entrance to the forest trail. The police were skeptical about Carol's story, and when they dug deeper, they discovered many inconsistencies. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister, but they had run into Christy and her sister on the way. Carol then invited Christy to join her and they left their sisters behind to go to the mall. However, when they arrived at the entrance to the woods, no one appeared and Carol claimed that she had gone to the shopping center to ask for the time. When she turned around, Christy was gone. The police investigation revealed that there had been no cheerleading competitions in town, casting doubt on the reason for Carol and Christy's trip to the woods. Police suspected that the mysterious phone call might have been a ruse to lure Carol into the woods, but they were unable to trace the call to identify the caller. Further investigation revealed discrepancies in Carol's story. She claimed to have met Christy and her sister on the street, but Kim said they had been at the pool and Carol had come to meet them there. Additionally, Christy's mother reported a strange conversation with Carol later that evening, which raised further suspicions. Carol apologized to Christy's mother and revealed that she had been the intended target of a murder involving two people. However, she quickly retracted her words and left. Christy's mother reported this to the police. The police questioned Carol again, but she denied making a statement and stuck to her original story. Carol was then given a polygraph test, which did not reveal any signs of deception when Carol answered key questions. As a result, investigators shifted focus away from Carol and pursued other leads. Police intensified their search for the killer 3 days after Christy's murder. A police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus spotted a man who bore a striking resemblance to a sketch of Christy's killer. Patrol officers quickly called detectives to the scene and asked Jack to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, Jack Carmen, 25, agreed to go with them. However, the police soon realized that Jack was severely mentally disabled, with an IQ of about 50 points. Results based on many different tests. As a result, Jack had limited communication skills and could not read or write. He was cared for by a specialist medical facility and lived in a supervised apartment. Despite these challenges, detectives could not ignore the striking resemblance between Jack and the composite sketch of the suspect in Christy's case. The interrogation process was extremely difficult due to Jack's limited ability to understand and answer questions. Most of the time, he just answered with one word or stayed silent. The detectives began to question whether Jack was capable of fully understanding their questions. To improve the situation, they had to ask very simple and specific questions. After 6 hours of questioning, detectives were finally starting to get results. They were finally able to extract a confession from Jack. According to his testimony, on the day in question he had left his apartment, taken the bus to the shopping center and bought a shirt and pants. As Jack walked through the parking lot, he saw Christy sitting on a fence near the entrance to a wooded trail. He approached her, tied her up by tying her hands, and then dragged her into the woods where he carried out the assault. After the attack, Christy tried to run away, but Jack quickly caught up with her. He picked up a nearby piece of wood and repeatedly hit her in the head. Jack then ran to the main road in front of the shopping center and boarded the bus. The next day, police took Jack to the forest where he allegedly committed the crime. There, he pointed out the exact spot and provided specific details that only the perpetrator would know, including the fact that the piece of wood used to strike the victim broke in half. Investigators also verified the testimony, asking the couple who found Christy to identify the person they had seen on the day of the incident. Both identified the man they had seen as Jack. As a result, Jack was charged with multiple offenses, including assault and murder. The prosecution chose to include it in the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer negotiated a deal. In exchange for a life sentence, Jack would plead guilty before the judge, thereby avoiding execution. The case moved swiftly, with thousands of people following. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack was sentenced to life in prison. However, after the trial, public opinion began to shift, and many people started to question Jack's guilt. As more details about his confession and his background emerged in the media, people began to wonder whether he was truly capable of committing such a heinous crime. Those who knew Jack found it hard to believe that he was capable of the crime. He was a passive, timid, and compliant person who would agree to anything if pushed hard enough. In the past, he had even taken the blame for something he didn't do, like the time he claimed responsibility for breaking a boiler at a charity center, when in fact someone else was to blame. This behavior raised doubts about his ability to make a genuine confession to the crime. His supporters felt that the police must have manipulated him into confessing by feeding him information and asking pressured questions. For instance, if the police asked him if he hit the victim with a piece of wood, and he answered yes, they could use that as a confession. However, this approach can be unreliable, especially considering Jack's tendency to confess to anything when under threat. Even the mention of the electric chair was enough to make him agree to whatever the detectives wanted. Furthermore, the police took Jack to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, a married couple who later identified him at the police station. This raised concerns that the witnesses had been biased, as they had already seen Jack and knew he was a suspect, despite the police's claims that they never crossed paths. There were several red flags surrounding Jack's alleged involvement in the crime. For instance, the police failed to locate the bus driver or any passengers who claimed to have seen Jack on his way to the city center, which contradicted his own statement. Moreover, multiple people at the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked said to have seen him at around 1:30 p.m. This created a major timing issue. Even if Jack had left immediately after being seen by these witnesses, the bus ride to the shopping center on the outskirts of town would have taken at least 40 minutes. Given the crime was committed at 1:50 p.m., it was logistically impossible for Jack to have made it on time. This cast serious doubts about Jack's guilt and raised suspicions that the police may have coerced his confession. Christy's parents, too, began questioning whether Jack was the true culprit. At the height of the controversy, approximately 70 individuals gathered in front of City Hall on September 9th to draw attention to the case and advocate for a comprehensive investigation. They established a public committee aimed at securing justice for Jack. As a result, Jack was assigned a new lawyer, who swiftly petitioned for a case review. After several months, a judge dismissed Jack's original confession and ordered a new trial, putting the onus on the prosecution to establish his guilt from the beginning. This marked a daunting challenge for the prosecution, making their case almost unviable. Norman Mills, Christy's father, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway. Dissatisfied with the way the detectives had worked, Norman took matters into his own hands. Immediately after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the area where Christy was found. They discovered a bloody pair of jean shorts and men's underwear in the woods. They turned the items over to the police, who had initially missed them. It was unclear whether these items were related to the case or if they had been examined for evidence. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for the role, who they considered to be the prime suspect. The man who found Christ's body along with his wife was Henry Newell, who was 25 years old at the time of the murder. At the beginning of the trial, Jack's lawyers had amassed an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry of murder, and during the trial, the list grew even longer. Initially, Henry attracted attention because of his criminal record. Beginning in his teenage years, he had been arrested multiple times for various crimes, serving 3 prison sentences. He had successfully escaped from prison twice before being captured and brought back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for burning down a house to collect insurance money. Lawyers also reviewed evidence from Christ's case and found some very suspicious details in his testimony. Henry said he had found her body, ran over, and threw a bloody piece of wood aside. He explained this by saying that he was in a state of shock at the time. But acting like that still seemed odd. Why did he pick up the murder weapon and throw it from his body for no apparent reason? He also testified that he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he actually try to stop the bleeding, or was his shirt stained with blood during the murder, and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyer found a store clerk in the mall where Henry had run to call the police. She said he was not wearing a shirt but was wearing jean shorts, although by the time police arrived, he was wearing a different pair of pants. The employee also confirmed that Henry had a new bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately report this to the police, she said no one had asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed this bruising but ignored it. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine. Another witness was Henry's neighbor, who said that on the night of the murder, he had talked to Henry and noticed many new scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage that was the same color and shape as the cord used to tie the victim's hands. That's not all. The neighbor said that Henry had once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Christ's 14-year-old friend Carol and that they had once swum naked together in the pool. This story shocked everyone involved in the case. It turned out that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who was also directly involved in the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court, saying everything had happened exactly as they told police on the first day. They had gone to the mall, and their son wanted to go for a walk. They went into the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point, Henry had remained at home and only stepped outside for a few minutes to scare away neighborhood children who had begun throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified, saying she had never met Henry. She was also asked about her intentions in telling Christ's mother that things should not have escalated to this point, but Carol again claimed she did not remember saying anything like that. Henry himself repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most important moments of the trial was the showing of the entire recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching it, it became clear to everyone that Jack had simply been forced to confirm the detective's words that he had committed murder. Jack barely said anything and didn't seem to fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that was not the most important moment of the trial. On the 5th day, another unexpected witness appeared. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. Bobby revealed that that day, Henry had indeed gone out of the house to chase away the children who had thrown firecrackers into the yard. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing, and Henry had scars on his hands and face. Bobby was told by his parents that they would be going to the shopping center, but when they arrived, they instead took him on a walk in the woods behind the center. Bobby claims he never asked to go for a walk, which contradicts what his parents initially said. During the walk, they found Henry's torn sandal and then Christy's body. Bobby's mother instructed him not to tell anyone about what he saw. At the trial, Bobby's grandmother testified about a disturbing comment made by Henry during Christy's farewell ceremony. After expressing her sadness about Christy's death, Henry replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness, Henry's friend, came forward and said that Henry had confessed to him that he accidentally killed Christy. Although the evidence clearly pointed to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor surprisingly announced that they would not pursue a case against Henry. The prosecutor also claimed that the initial investigation was handled correctly, despite acknowledging that the police missed or ignored many clues from the beginning. The public was outraged by this decision, leading the prosecutor to change his mind 2 days later and agree to reopen the investigation into Christy's death. Christy's father refused to give up on seeking justice and filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, but not because he believed Jack was involved in the murder. Rather, he hoped to gain access to the case files and gather more information. Unfortunately, this effort also proved unsuccessful. The case had remained stagnant until 2013, when Henry died of terminal cancer. Despite this, in the same year, former attorney John Aller became interested in the case and conducted his own investigation. He contacted all parties involved in gathering new information. Christy's relatives had provided John with a box of records that Christy's father had collected. After reviewing the records and talking to dozens of people, John believed that Henry was the culprit behind Christy's murder. John's investigation revealed that Carol had bought marijuana from Henry, which made him suspect that Henry was involved in the crime. This new discovery created a possible connection between Henry and Carol, which could explain why Carol brought Christy to the forest. One theory is that Carol planned to meet Henry in the forest to buy an illegal substance. It's possible that Carol invited Christy along, using the DJ story as a cover. A more sinister explanation suggests that Carol brought Christy to the forest at Henry's request, intending for him to harm her. However, Christy resisted, as evidenced by Henry's injuries, and he ultimately killed her. When John took over the case, Henry had passed away from cancer at the age of 63. However, John continued his work and released a book about Christy's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest, and Christy's relatives demanded that the investigation be reopened. Some of Henry's relatives also confirmed that Henry was the one who killed the girl. This led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. Detectives re-examined the evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and reassessed Henry's confession. They re-examined Christy's clothes and found traces of semen, but they were too small for DNA analysis. The investigation lasted until late 2015, when detectives announced that Henry was the one who had committed the crime. But because he had passed away, the case could not go to court. The investigation ended with the conclusion that Henry had left home, gone to the road behind the shopping center, seen Christy alone, and decided to assault her with a telephone cord, taking her deep into the woods. Henry had attacked Christy, injuring her. Then he killed her with a piece of wood. Returning home, Henry recounted the incident to his wife, and the two began to make plans to avoid punishment. For many years afterward, Carol never revealed the truth. Police later apologized to Christy's family for their careless handling of the incident. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father was in the military, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana met Kevin Green. When Diana was harassed by several men at a bar, Kevin intervened and chased the men away. In gratitude, Diana bought Kevin a drink. They went on a date a few days later, and their relationship quickly progressed. Kevin was in the process of divorcing his first wife. Kevin and Diana moved in together for a while, and Diana became pregnant. After Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married. While waiting for their daughter to be born, they rented an apartment in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana stayed home to prepare for the baby's arrival, having previously worked with her mother in a garment factory. By late September 1979, Diana was nearly 9 months pregnant. On the evening of September 30th, Kevin and Diana got into an argument after watching a movie together. The impending birth of their daughter had put a strain on their relationship. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby restaurant. About 40 minutes after the incident, Kevin called the local police department to report that his wife, Diana, had been shot and needed immediate medical attention. Police arrived on the scene shortly after receiving the call. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed, covered in blood, with a head wound that appeared to be a gunshot wound. However, upon closer examination, paramedics later determined that the wound was actually caused by blunt force trauma. When the police checked on Diana, found her alive and provided first aid until the ambulance arrived, they asked Kevin to leave the room. After the paramedics took over, they carefully transported Diana to the hospital. Meanwhile, the police asked Kevin to stay behind to give a statement. He told police that he and his wife had been arguing, so he decided to leave the apartment to calm down and buy some burgers at a fast food restaurant. In his haste, he realized he had left his keys inside, but chose not to go back to get them. Instead, he locked the door and went to his car. As Kevin drove away from the apartment complex, he noticed a truck with its back door open, and an African-American man walking back and forth toward the truck. It was late, around 2 a.m. He drove to the fast food restaurant he frequented, but it was busy, so he went to another location a few miles away. After buying a burger, he drove home, which took 40 minutes. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. He rushed inside and found his wife, Diana, covered in blood. He immediately called the police. Kevin's story had some suspicious signs, but when the police checked the fast food bag, they found the food was still warm and the receipt confirmed the time and place of purchase, supporting Kevin's story. As a result, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but not before asking him to provide a blood sample for further investigation. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts could still compare the blood found at the crime scene with Kevin's blood type. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors determined that her head wound was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it was likely inflicted by a small, heavy object. Unfortunately, Diana fell into a coma. The medical team worked diligently for several hours to save both her and her unborn child. After many hours of intense care, they were able to stabilize Diana's condition, but she still required surgery. During the investigation, police asked medical experts to determine whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The experts confirmed that Diana had indeed been sexually assaulted, finding semen on her body. However, Kevin testified that he and Diana had had sex just hours before the argument. Diana and Kevin's family stayed in the hospital all night. And the next morning, the baby's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. Doctors tried, but the baby did not survive. Although Diana remained in a coma, her chances of survival had improved. However, doctors warned that she could suffer long-term effects. Although Kevin had an alibi, police were not quick to clear him due to several inconsistencies in his story. He had an argument with Diana just hours before the attack, left his front door unlocked, and spent much of the time on a quick trip to a fast food restaurant. His claim of seeing a suspicious person near his home at night also raised suspicions. However, there was no concrete evidence linking Kevin to the crime. Police are investigating another suspect in a series of similar crimes in the area. A year earlier, a series of break-ins and assaults had occurred in Tustin and surrounding areas with similar modus operandi. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was killed after being beaten with a piece of wood and sexually assaulted. 4 months later, a 21-year-old woman was murdered and sexually assaulted. In July 1979, a woman was attacked in her apartment but survived, although she was in a coma for several weeks. Her testimony provided no new leads. Prior to Diana's attack, a similar attack occurred in September 1979, when a 34-year-old woman was murdered. A series of crimes occurred, all with striking similarities to the attack on Diana. The police believed they were dealing with a serial killer and focused their efforts on capturing him. To address the growing concern, the police decided to issue a public warning through the media, specifically targeting women living alone and those living in low-rise apartments, who appeared to be the serial killer's favorite targets. The warning caused panic, and in response, the police increased night patrols in the area. The police began by interviewing and soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was somewhat vague, the police were able to identify several men who matched and investigate them. Unfortunately, these leads did not lead to any cases. A week after Diana was attacked, her doctors informed her loved ones that she had finally regained consciousness. However, there was a serious concern: Diana was unable to speak or remember anything. According to her doctors, her brain was still recovering. Around the same time, another attack occurred in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, striking her multiple times with a piece of wood and sexually assaulting her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police were once again unable to catch the perpetrator. Diana spent several days in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. During this time, her mind slowly cleared, but she had lost almost all of her memory. Doctors told her family that her memories might return, but warned them not to remind her of anything, letting her remember on her own. After being stabilized, Diana was discharged from the hospital and her family took her home. Her husband Kevin had to work at the military base, so Diana was sent to live with Diana's parents. 2 weeks later, another attack occurred in the city, similar to the one on Diana. This time, the attacker killed a 17-year-old girl. Diana began attending physical therapy sessions and her condition gradually improved. Although she still could not speak or remember the attack, a breakthrough occurred 6 weeks later during a therapy session. The doctor asked Diana if she could remember who attacked her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly pointed to her wedding ring. The doctor shared this information with Diana's mother when she came to pick her up. Diana's mother asked her daughter if her husband, Kevin, was the one who attacked her, and Diana nodded. Diana's mother immediately took her to the police station to speak with the chief. After asking Diana a few more questions, the police confirmed that she remembered her attacker and identified him as her husband, Kevin. This new information dramatically changed the course of the investigation. Police suspected that Diana's attack was related to a series of similar incidents in the area, committed by a serial offender. However, Kevin matched the suspect's description, leading police to question whether Kevin could be the culprit behind these attacks. The police asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana had not recovered her memory and to return home with Kevin. But they agreed to do so. Meanwhile, the police kept a close watch on Kevin, monitoring his every move in the hope of finding evidence of a crime linked to the serial murders. Crime scene testing revealed evidence under Diana's fingernails, where they found bloody skin particles, in addition to the attacker's semen. After analyzing the evidence, police found a match between the attacker's blood type and Kevin's blood sample, indicating that Kevin was the one who attacked Diana. As for a motive, police suspect that Diana's refusal to have sex with Kevin may have prompted the attack. Although Kevin insists that they had sex earlier that night. The police spoke to Diana, and she remembered the attack clearly, confirming that Kevin was her killer. During the conversation, her mother expressed that they could no longer live with Kevin, and the police decided to arrest him. To protect Diana's family, Kevin was arrested at a store instead of at their home. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence. Preparations for the trial lasted 10 months, during which time Diana's health gradually improved. She regained her ability to speak. Diana was cleared of the charges, and her husband was found guilty of assaulting her. Kevin's defense team tried to use his fast food alibi, but it was not enough to disprove Diana's testimony. As a result, Kevin was convicted in November 1980 of the child's murder and assault on Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Police learned that 2 similar crimes had occurred in their district before Kevin was arrested, but both victims survived. Although the identity of the attacker remains unknown, these incidents raised suspicions that Kevin was involved in other crimes. The attacks stopped abruptly after Kevin was arrested. After Kevin's sentencing, Diana promptly filed for divorce, which Kevin did not contest. Diana then focused on her recovery. When Kevin became eligible for parole, the committee denied his request, a decision that was repeated 3 more times. The serial killer case remained unsolved until 1996, when police reopened the investigation. Semen samples from the victims, which had been stored in a laboratory, were retested. Police wanted to determine who the culprit was, and DNA analysis yielded a surprising result. Gerald Parker, a man arrested the same year as Kevin, was found to have a DNA match to the serial murders. After the DNA match confirmed Parker's involvement in the serial murders, investigators re-examined the attack on Diana. Parker and Kevin worked together on a military base, and Parker owned a dark-colored van, similar to the one described in the attacks. During his initial police interview, Kevin reported seeing an African-American man near a dark-colored truck in front of their home on the day of the attack. This information led police to consider the possibility that Parker was involved in the attack on Diana. While Kevin was in jail, the local prosecutor updated him on the progress of the Bedroom Basher serial murder investigation. The prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a DNA sample, which he quickly agreed to. While the DNA analysis was underway, police visited Parker in prison to discuss the case. Although they had not yet formally charged him with the attacks, they hoped to gather more information. Parker initially denied any involvement in the crimes, so detectives focused their questioning on the attack on Diana. During questioning, Parker revealed that on the night of the incident, he drove his truck to Kevin's house, intending to circle the neighborhood, looking through the ground floor windows for a victim. However, this time, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when Kevin left the house, Parker noticed that the door was unlocked, so he waited a few minutes before entering the apartment and attacking Diana. Parker revealed that he did not know Kevin's wife because they worked in different areas of the military base. He also confessed to committing 6 murders and 3 non-fatal attacks. After Parker's confessions, DNA evidence confirmed his guilt and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor quickly moved to overturn Kevin's sentence, and he was released from prison after 16 years. The case has caused widespread outrage, not only because an innocent man spent nearly half his life in prison, but also because it took so long for police to identify the real killer. When Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in compensation, a relatively small amount. Years later, he received an additional $100 for each day he spent in prison, totaling $620,000. Despite Kevin's exoneration, His wife Diana initially refused to believe he was innocent. She had previously claimed that Kevin was her only attacker. However, after DNA evidence from her body matched Parker's, she changed her story. Diana reported that Kevin attacked her before leaving the apartment, and then Parker entered and attacked her as well. However, Parker said that when he entered the house, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress. He also admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family proposed an alternative theory, suggesting that Kevin might have conspired with Parker to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house that night, leaving the door open. However, Parker denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was large and many people didn't know each other personally. Parker denied knowing Kevin. Kevin also denied any involvement with Parker, insisting that he would never harm Diana or their unborn daughter. He explained that he left the door open because he didn't want to go back to get the keys after their argument. And he still blames himself for that decision. As for Parker, he was sentenced to death in 1999, but this sentence has yet to be carried out. After years of waiting on death row, California imposed a moratorium on executions, and as a result, Parker remains incarcerated to this day. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Lynn Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a loving family with two older brothers. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family lived in a small apartment building. Debbie was a cheerful and sociable child. On the evening of January 13, 1972, after dinner with her family, Debbie went to the laundromat to supervise the laundry. Debbie's home was just a short distance from the laundromat, so her mother wasn't overly concerned about her safety when she was sent to do the laundry. The original plan was for Debbie to go with her brother, but he was feeling unwell, so Debbie's mother sent her husband to pick up the laundry and Debbie went with her stepfather, holding a box of laundry detergent. At the laundromat, Roy put the clothes in two washing machines and left, leaving Debbie waiting for the cycle to finish. After the wash, Debbie had to walk home and ask someone to pick up her clean clothes because she couldn't carry them herself. However, when the laundry should have been finished and Debbie still hadn't returned, her mother began to feel uneasy. It was getting dark outside, so she and her husband decided to walk to the laundromat to look for Debbie, but she was nowhere to be found. The employee informed them that Debbie had left the laundromat some time ago and had not returned. The news worried her mother, who began searching the surrounding streets with Roy. As they walked, they discovered a suspicious scene. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot next to a car, there was a spilled detergent. Since Debbie had brought a box of detergent with her, her mother suspected that it might be hers. Despite expanding their search to the entire parking lot and the surrounding area, they found no other sign of Debbie. Neighbors who knew the family joined in the search. Debbie's mother decided to call the police for help. The police investigated the parking lot and discovered their first clue: spilled laundry detergent just inches from a parked car, and on the car door, they found several clear fingerprints. The police found fresh fingerprints on the car that were located lower than the handle, which seemed unusual. They suspected that an unknown person might have grabbed the girl while touching the car at this spot. The officers collected the fingerprints and sent them to forensic experts for analysis. They also started searching for the car's owner to confirm whether the fingerprints belonged to them. With no other leads, the police began a thorough search of the area, looking for new clues or witnesses. The laundry worker reported that she did not see anything suspicious. Debbie had waited for the laundry to finish, then left the building with the detergent box. It is possible that she went home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. Police discovered the first key witness, 12-year-old Sandra, who said that as she and her friend walked to a laundromat to drop off dirty clothes. They saw a man grab a girl on the street, drag her to his car parked near the laundromat, and drive away quickly while she screamed for help. Sandra and her friend were lucky to avoid the man's car. Debbie screamed in a car, but he did not slow down. At the time, Sandra did not consider what she saw to be a kidnapping. She assumed the man was a family member who had come to pick Debbie up, possibly against her will. So Sandra did not report the incident to the authorities or tell any adults about it. After learning about Debbie's disappearance, Sandra provided essential details to investigators. She described the abductor's vehicle as a dark-colored, likely 1957 model pickup truck. She also described the man as young, white, with thick dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another key witness, a girl who lived in the same building as Debbie, shared her observations. She saw a dark-colored pickup truck drive past the apartment building on the evening in question. The girl initially thought the driver of the car was her uncle, but when he stopped in front of her and looked at her, she realized it was someone else. She described the driver as a white man with medium-length dark hair and provided additional details about his appearance. She also reported that he parked his car near their building, next to the same car where a detergent spill would later be discovered. Another witness, a man who lived near the girl's home, reported that a dark-colored pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, almost hit him while he was driving to visit his wife in the hospital. The driver appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair, and the witness saw a girl in the car trying to escape while the driver held her with one arm. Based on these accounts, the police believed Debbie had been kidnapped. They circulated the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and created a composite sketch of the driver based on descriptions from witnesses. Some officers searched for similar vehicles and checked their owners, while others conducted a wide-ranging search for the girl. As the days passed, more volunteers and police from surrounding towns joined the search. Police questioned Debbie's family, and after investigation, they were all cleared as potential suspects. Debbie's biological father, who lived in the same city, was notified of her disappearance at work and immediately joined the search effort. Police also ran background checks on convicted criminals who lived near Debbie's home, but none of them appeared to be viable suspects. The search for Debbie continued for over 2 weeks without any significant leads. It wasn't until January 29th, when a group of students joined the search teams, that a breakthrough occurred. The students were sent to search a wooded area several miles from Debbie's house. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students noticed a set of tracks on the ground that led from the trail into the forest, suggesting that something had been dragged into the woods. As they followed the trail about 150 feet into the woods, they discovered a human body and immediately contacted the police. Upon further inspection, they quickly identified the body as Debbie Randall. She was wearing the same outfit her mother had described on the day she went missing. However, her shoes were missing. The medical examination of the Debbie's body revealed that she had been strangled to death and had also been sexually assaulted. A single dark hair was found on her body, which was likely to belong to the killer. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts were able to examine the hair under a microscope and estimate that it came from a man between the ages of 18 and 30. The investigation then focused on the victim's clothing, which was covered in soil. Police enlisted the help of a geologist to analyze the soil, along with a forensic team. They discovered that some of the soil contained a type of soil mined less than 10 miles from their town called North Georgia clay. However, other stains on the clothing were found to be from a different type of clay, mined by a company just 2 miles from where the body was found. Police theorized that the perpetrator did not kill Debbie immediately, but rather drove her to remote areas, sexually assaulting her in one location and killing her in another, before finally dumping her body in the woods. Police believe the killer may have been hired by one of the nearby mining companies. After contacting these companies, the police searched the employees of both companies but did not find the suspect or the vehicle described by the victims. Furthermore, they found fingerprints near the abduction site, but unfortunately, when these fingerprints were compared to the suspects, there was no match. Debbie's death sent shockwaves through the city, with thousands attending her funeral. Police repeatedly ran into roadblocks in their search for clues. Police officer Morris Nix investigated many suspects and eventually narrowed the list down to 4 people. For Morris Nix, Debbie's murder remained a top priority throughout his career. The case took a breakthrough with the creation of the FBI's DNA database. Experts successfully extracted a genetic profile from hair found on Debbie's body, which was then entered into the database. However, no matches were found. In 2015, 43 years after the murder, police reopened the case and decided to re-examine the victim's clothing using modern technology. The clothing had been stored in an evidence vault since the crime. When re-examined, some of the evidence had degraded over time, resulting in only a partial DNA profile. In 2018, Debbie's mother gave an interview, expressing her hope that her daughter's killer would be found. After the tragedy, she found it unbearable to stay in their apartment, so she moved to another city. Her only wish was for the case to be solved before she died. Sadly, she died of cancer at the age of 78, just weeks after the interview, and was buried next to Debbie. In 2019, the local police department received additional funding, which allowed them to conduct a more thorough analysis of Debbie's clothing. This time, experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was still not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was interviewed and shared that he thought about his daughter every day for decades. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, shortly after the interview. Police turned their attention to the first piece of evidence they had, DNA. They partnered with a Florida company that specializes in an advanced DNA analysis technique called genomics. Police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years and waited for the results. Experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and began searching for his relatives in public genetic databases. After analyzing thousands of potential relatives of the killer, investigators narrowed their search to a family in Marietta. In 2023, police asked the family to provide a DNA sample, which they agreed to. Analysis showed that the killer was indeed a close relative of the family. Experts re-examined the family tree and quickly identified a man named William Rose. However, William Rose committed suicide in 1974, just 2 years after Debbie's murder. Police obtained a warrant to exhume William Rose's remains and took a sample of William Rose's DNA for analysis. 51 years after Debbie's murder, police finally identified William Rose as the killer. At the time of the murder, William Rose, 24, lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he visited them frequently. The case has finally been solved. Debbie's brother, Melvin, is the only living relative. Melvin attended a press conference and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving the case that lasted more than 50 years.